I'm David Scandura,
I'm Justice Burkett.
and today we're here to find out, is Mikey and Nickey the greatest movie ever made?
You give me that in 30 seconds, you hear me, or I'll kill you.
Okay, sir.
Because I'm crazy.
Welcome to the greatest movie ever made, the show where we watch a movie and tell you if it's the greatest movie ever made.
I don't have anything to say. You can continue.
A movie that is so thoroughly entertaining and compelling that while you're watching it, it's the only thing that matters in the world.
Sorry, I warned you the last time, and then I didn't warn you this time that I wasn't going to say anything. So then you were... Yeah.
I'm sick, I need a doctor, or anything like
well,
that.
I don't know. It just nothing. I wasn't feeling the inspiration, David. And once again, I'm trying to avoid just saying things to fill space and trying to only contribute when I have something like worth saying.
Understandable.
We're continuing that from last week. That was not a one-time thing. So with that, I'll shut the fuck up now.
I didn't think of a funny name for you. So I'm David Scandura, joined as always by my co-host Justice Burkett.
Hey, that's me. Yeah, man, you could have called me coffee shop owner being strangled by Peter Falk. You could have called me fat mafia hitman rolling up on John Cassavettes.
Guy sitting in the kitchen while he's listening to his best friend have sex with a sex worker.
Yeah, I don't... Is she a sex worker, though? We'll talk about it. I'm not really sure what the situation is there. So, anyway, David, we have a guest with us this week. So, would you do the honors in introducing our esteemed guest?
Yes. Joining us for the first time on the show is our friend. This is actually our first time speaking with him in person, so it's a momentous occasion for us. Our friend and cinephile Kevin Hurley.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah,
awesome.
Kevin, when David introduced you as a cinephile, I feel like that's my perception of you as well. I feel like because I don't know how much of the show you've listened to, but I've mentioned on a few episodes that I am not actually that much of a film buff. I have said multiple times that I'm like kind of the least qualified person to have a movie podcast because I haven't seen that many movies. My love of movies as an art form, as opposed to just one of many sources of casual entertainment, right? My specific love of like movies as their own thing is pretty young in my life. Like I don't have a ton of history there. So I'm sort of like a budding film appreciator, but I wouldn't call myself a cinephile or a film buff. I think I would characterize David that way to some extent. But I think, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but at least this is my perception. I think that you probably have seen more of the classic film buff cinephile movies. Your horizons, I think, are broader and deeper than David's and mine. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how I perceive you based on our online interactions. So I would like it, Kevin, if you would just talk us through a little bit, kind of your history with film, and like how you came to appreciate movies the way that you do, and also just like kind of your history with genres, what you're into right now, what you've been into, and also your history with the crime film as well, because that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always loved movies, but specifically, it kind of started with I've always wanted to be a photographer, and now I'm a professional photojournalist, which is like it was a dream of mine since like high school. And there's this specific feeling I would get of like creative fulfillment in photography that I didn't really find anywhere else. Sometimes when I would like I played the violin a little bit in middle school, that sometimes gave me that feeling, but watching movies was like the easiest way to tap into that for me. And I always I loved like as a kid, I remember early on being shown The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by my dad. And I was like, this is insane. Like, what the hell is this? Or Jurassic Park was another early one of like, okay, like this stuff's not just like, fun. Like, it's not Finding Nemo. I mean, that's a good movie, but like
Right.
stuff that's like it's not just made for children or whatever. And then
Yeah.
I like got into college and photography became my job. And it's like I still love it to death, but I want to like turn it off sometimes. And that's where movies came in, and that's where like sports is also a huge thing for me, but like I remember learning to take it more seriously after my friend showed me 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was like I was
Mhm.
19, and it also came at a very awful point in my life where I had survived a fatal car accident, and like that's how I became like permanently disabled. So now I'm like I got time on my hands. I'm like grieving and healing. And then I saw my friends like, "Have you seen this movie? It's like an old sci-fi film that looks like it was made a couple years ago, how good it was." And then that like left me like stunned in a way I'd never felt. Almost like a almost like a religious spiritual feeling, which is a little
Mhm.
corny, but it's like that's the only way I could describe it. And then like I got into college and I was like so caught up in that I barely watched anything for like a few years. Then I then the like pandemic hit and then I graduated like 2 years later and I was like, all right, I got time on my hands. I don't have a job yet, or if I did, I'm underemployed. It's time to just crush 4 movies a day, two, three a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have this specific fascination with old art. Like, I love a lot of the music I listen to is old. A lot of the like paintings that I enjoy are old. Uh, and then movies is kind of the same. Like,
Mhm.
I do think part of it is my love with like celluloid. Like seeing movies shot on film is just gives me such a like a warmth, and it feels more magical than shot on digital. But doesn't mean shot on digital is bad. But it's kind of like I have this obsession of like I want to see every single film I possibly can, and that is something you got to deal with. Is like you never will see them all, but
Right.
but you
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
want
there's
to.
too many. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Let alone every movie that's sitting on my shelf right now that I bought at Goodwill for $2.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the same. I've got like 10 Blu-rays that I haven't tapped into, but I know I will like them, or I have seen them, but it's like, I gotta feel it out. Like if I'm not feeling, a First Reformed vibe, or I'm not feeling a Bad Lieutenant vibe, I'm not gonna like it as much. Like I need to feel it, and then I'm like, all right, time to pop it in.
Yeah, yeah. By contrast, because both of you have your collections of physical media that you are continuously exploring, and I have the dark recesses of the to be found footage horror
Mm.
section. Which is equally bottomless and equally alluring to me, but probably holds less artistic merit, maybe. um,
Yeah, I
but
feel like Justice, you watch baby goo goo gaga movies. Kevin watches real movies, and I'm somewhere in the
you're
middle,
somewhere in between, yeah.
where like I haven't seen everything Kurosawa's done. Uh, I also haven't seen every piece of shit that comes out on Tubi or
Yeah.
is put out by Full Moon Features or anything like that.
Yeah, you haven't seen
I'm
everything in the Shudder found frights category,
yeah,
whereas I only have about 2 titles left to go in there, my
yeah.
friend. I'm working my way through all of those. Yeah, thanks for the rundown on your history with film, Kevin. It's always something that I've been curious about since we've kind of been online friends, and it's cool to have the ability to actually like talk to you about it, so that we don't have to exchange 1,500 DMs to get to the same level
100%.
of depth on something. Which, speaking of which, just a funny anecdote to let the listeners in on. We do have a group chat with Kevin, David and I do, and David and Kevin talk back and forth and share memes and stuff. And I come in every once in a while and do like one fire react or one heart react to something, like once every 3 months.
Hell yeah.
So I'm very inactive in there, which apologies for that. It's because I, as part of my New Year's resolution, was like, I'm going to spend less time on social media. So I literally have limited myself to 15 minutes of screen time on Twitter every single weekday. And once that runs out, it just locks me out of the app. And I made the Podmaster set the password so that I can't get back in.
You're stronger
So
than me.
that's why I'm so inactive in there. Because I'm trying to protect myself from spending too much time on X for my own mental health.
Yeah, it'll be better for you.
Oh no. Called it
Yeah.
X.
Yeah, but facetiously. If the listeners could see my face when I said it, they could tell that it's said with a great degree of disdain. Anyway.
Kevin, I find it interesting that you brought up 2001 as a movie that kind of opened up the art of film to you, the world of film, because I had a similar experience with it. Like I watched it in high school, and I was like, "Oh, this is what movies can do." You know, like it felt like an extension of the art form and like pushing it past its limits. I remember that was one of the movies that you had thought about talking about, and but you ended up giving us Mikey and Nickey, directed by Elaine May. So I'm interested what this movie did for you the first time you watched it.
So when I found Mikey and Nickey, it was kind of after I discovered John Cassavettes. He's like one of my all-time favorites, and he has this specific like improvisational vibe that he's kind of known for because he started in theater acting, and then he eventually made I think he called it like his actor's workshop, where he would teach people how to act better, I guess. And I read a book about it called Cassavetes on Cassavetes by Ray Carney, and it's just like stream of consciousness interviews of him because he's kind of a crazy guy, but he he like similar to why I love 2001. It's like I noticed that film's kind of out there to capture a feeling that like sometimes literature can't do as well, or maybe a very specific one. And Mikey and Nicky, I found that too. Like it's it's incredibly real in its depiction of human interaction, where it's like everybody has that like friendships that didn't work out long term, or like they almost feel betrayed because it's like, well, this isn't the guy I used to know. And it almost felt like John Cassavetes directed this just because Elaine May and John Cassavetes had the similar, like, we're going to let the film run for a long time and see what we get, just letting them kind of explore the script a little. And it's like one of the most moving films I've seen. Well, but for a number of reasons, it's incredible.
Yeah, watching it last night, I got that sense of Cassavetes and Falk improvising a bunch of this because it has that feeling to it. And I think this is the first movie we've talked about directed by a woman.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
I'd have to look, but there's something about this that
It took us 30 episodes, by the way, David. So yeah, Kevin is shaming us. I think that's fair for us to be shamed a little bit here. That it took us 30 episodes to get to a movie directed by a woman. But we'll try and do better about that in the future. It won't be another 30 episodes before we hit another one.
Yeah, we'll throw in American Psycho or something.
Yeah, there you go.
What I find interesting about this is it has the vibe and the aesthetic and the feeling of a 70s gangster film along the lines of Mean Streets or even like Taxi Driver or Coppola, Godfather and stuff like that. But those gangster movie elements are almost secondary to the fact that this is really a character study and really an exploration of the relationship of these characters. And it's like, coming from a woman, it feels like it's almost a commentary on that genre, or a deconstruction of it in some way.
I completely agree with that, especially when you see the way the women in Mikey and Nicky's life react to their behavior. Like
Yeah.
when kind of near the end when Nicky shows up to his like I guess not they weren't divorced yet, but they separated his wife and she's like, "Well,
Yeah.
too bad Resnick's trying to kill you because then you won't be able to spend all your time with him together." Or he tries to go even to his baby daughter in the crib. She won't even hold his hand because he's just like his energy is so like rancid and he's such a scumbag
Yeah.
and he's trying to like charm his way out of everything because he's this handsome guy and he's like, no, I can, like, come on, babe, let me just talk to you for a minute. And then even his I think you guys mentioned it, like I don't think the women they hook up with is necessarily a sex worker because
Yeah.
Mikey's like, you're not paying for that. You're just going. And he's like, it's this Nicky realizes that this is like a vulnerable woman who just like wants intimacy. And he's like, no, if you say you love her, then you'll get to sleep with her. That's fine. You just lie
Right.
to her. And it's like, oh my God, this guy sucks. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, I completely
And
agree.
It's really it's really a movie about two men who can't find love and meaningful relationships anywhere else in their life, particularly with women. So when they get down to this very stressful situation that they're in, and they have to confront and explore their own relationship with each other, they also find it to be equally empty and unfulfilling. Right? And that's like
100%. Yeah.
kind of profoundly sad. I found it profoundly sad at the end of the movie where you realize that both of these guys are basically alone. And
Yeah.
they probably never should have been never should have been friends to begin with.
With that, should we talk about the movie? Should we like get into what happens in the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
I should note before we get started, I guess Elaine May had a lot of clashes with the studio over this film, and because she was shooting so much film, and the original cut that was released was done without her involvement, and then later it was eventually restored by the Criterion Collection. So I'm assuming that's the version that I watched, which was on streaming. But movie wasn't very successful. She didn't get the chance to direct another movie for quite some time after this.
Can I add to that real quick?
And
When you're done?
yeah, go ahead.
So I found out that apparently, like, that yes, the studio like kind of didn't like the movie, and it took so long to make, and it was over budget and all this stuff, and apparently she had to hold part of the physical reel like hostage. She said, "I will not let you edit this film in a way that I won't like it." So for like 2 years, I think it was, she hid like a big chunk of the movie so they couldn't make it. And then
That
she
rocks.
eventually won, and she's like, they released it, but they had to like apparently make some consolidations or whatever. But she literally stole part of the movie. Well, not stole, but hid it from them so they couldn't make it
Yeah.
without her. And I think
That
I know.
rocks. She seems so cool.
Yeah.
I know Elaine May is like sort of a complicated figure because like she is one of those people who has had relatively recent collaborations with Woody Allen. So there's like stuff like that, you know? But like by and large, she's still alive. She's like 91. And man, just like what a legend. And like stuff like that I hear about her, I'm like, man, like she like what a tough lady and what an amazing artist, you know. And like also I read that Paramount, as kind of like a fuck you to her for all of the tension that they had had with her on like her stealing the film reels and stuff. Right, they put it in theaters. One of the reasons this movie was unsuccessful is because Paramount put it in theaters for the minimum amount of time that they could, based on the contract that they had with her.
wow.
They were basically like, we are going to keep this in theaters for as little time as possible, to not, like, without breaching our contract, just kind of as like a fuck you to her for giving them so much trouble. But it's like good for her for like sticking up for her vision of her movie, you know. And we probably wouldn't have this great Criterion cut that we all watched for this record if she hadn't, you know, had the like determination to like fight for her artistic vision. So it's rad.
And there's a pretty funny story about how Peter Falk and Cassavetes came together for this, because Cassavetes filmed his own movie called Husbands in 1970, and during that like stage where he's like, Cassavetes was trying to pitch it to studios, like, can you let me make this, and I'll, like, you know, the one for me, one for you type of thing, and like I think they wanted him to be in it ended up being Machine Gun McCain, which is like an Italian kind of mob movie where I haven't seen it, but it looks kind of silly. But then he got to make Husbands, which to me is one of my like all-time favorites, and it's like a tearjerker about like grief, and it's kind of based on Cassavetes losing I think his younger brother. But then before that was made, it was like the same time of like he's trying to get Husbands made, and then Peter Falk ran into him at a L.A. Lakers game because Cassavetes was like always there, and Peter Falk was like, "Hey, Elaine May's trying to make Mikey and Nickey. Do you want to be in it?" And Cassavetes like, "Yes," like just instantly, and then they met eventually in the Paramount lunchroom, and apparently Peter Falk has like a different interpretation of how this happened, because Cassavetes in the book I read was just like, yeah, we talked about it and then we figured it out and then we wanted to go. But Peter Falk told it that like
I saw the interview with Falk that you're about to talk about, and it's very funny to see Falk describe this, but continue.
Yeah, so like Peter Falk was talking to Cassavetes and he's like, yeah, so do you want to do this? And he's like, yeah, of course. And he's like, well, I haven't even told you anything about it. Like, you should ask like some serious questions about it, like what you would bring to this film. And then apparently he stands up on the lunch table and everybody in the room's like staring at him like, what are you doing? And he just starts yelling at him. He says, you think you need to pitch it to me? You think I'm one of these businessmen in like a derogatory sense? You think I'm like you and have to have everything figured out? And he's like, is Elaine making it? Yes. Are you in it? Yes. Then that's all I need to know. And then he just like,
yeah,
he's kind of insane like that. Like he's a vibes guy that would just like
which if that story is true, the way Falk tells it, that's awesome. Like it just makes it endears you to Cassavetes even more. And also it's hilarious that Cassavetes like fired shots at Falk, because I'm pretty sure the I'm not a businessman, I'm not like you, I don't need to have everything figured out, I'm not thinking about what's going to be good for my career. I'm pretty sure that was directly addressing the fact that Peter Falk at this point was like right at the peak of being the biggest TV star of the 70s, because he was in the middle of his Columbo run,
100%.
Right? So I'm pretty sure that if that's true, Cassavetes was like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. TV, that I don't need to think about being a part of a project by an amazing artist, right? I'm not thinking about how much this is going to pay like some people. And it's so funny to see Falk recounting it. He finishes telling that story, and he's like, so then we went back to eating lunch, and he just takes a huge drag from his cigarette. Peter Falk fucking rules.
It's funny, I was looking, and I think this is only the second movie I've seen with either Cassavetes or Falk. The others being Rosemary's Baby and The Princess Bride, respectively. I've never seen Columbo, and it gets memed on Twitter all the time, and I feel like I'm just totally lost.
I feel like
and
you
I
would
should probably watch it.
I feel like you would like Columbo. I feel like if you dove into Columbo, David, you might have a full on Columbo phase. I kind of have that suspicion.
It's good.
Buy a trench coat.
It-
Yeah, Columbo is good.
I think that's why I love. Well, one, I also think that's maybe why this wasn't as successful because people probably went into this like, oh, it's Columbo, and then they watch this
Right.
movie and it's like, no, this is Peter Falk like giving it his all. Like he's throwing haymakers
Yeah.
in this, and it is not the
Mm.
like, well, one more thing, like the silly guy in the suit, like accidentally solving crimes or whatever. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, when you say he's throwing haymakers, by the way, that is both figurative and at times literal in this movie. Falk is punching people in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which I appreciate. But yeah, David, I feel like I'm in a similar situation on Cassavetes, though, even though I've seen some Columbo, and I think I might have even seen Peter Falk in a couple other movies. Cassavetes, this is only number 2 for me as well. And I knew he did other stuff. I knew he had acted more outside of that movie, and that he had also had a whole directing career that I just never dove into. And honestly, Mikey and Nickey might be the impetus for me to start exploring that a little bit more, because I was always kind of curious about the guy, having seen Rosemary's Baby. But having seen this, I'm like, oh, this guy's really something special. So I might, husbands might be on the docket for me
Yeah.
in the future.
There's like 4 that I think are genuinely like masterpieces from him. Because like A Woman Under the Influence is probably his most famous one. So Peter Falk plays the husband of Jenna Rollins, and Jenna Rollins is Cassavetes' wife in real life. And then she also stars in Opening Night, which I sometimes go back and forth on my favorite, but I do think Opening Night is my favorite, directed by Cassavetes. And he's in it, but he's kind of like only in it at the beginning and the end. But he's still like, the movie wouldn't be the same if he wasn't in it. And then he does have a genre crime film. It's called The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Ben Gazzara plays like this like club owner that gets into debt, and he has to kill a Chinese bookie. And it's an incredible movie. Like it's sleazy and grimy, but it's fucking awesome. And then he's got
Yeah.
one other one called Love Streams, which is when Cassavetes, so that was 1984. He got, I believe, told he had like a year to live because he was a chronic alcoholic and smoker. I don't know, it might have been cancer. I'm not exactly sure, but he ended up living a little bit longer. And this, there's rumors that he mortgaged his house to make a few of his movies because he was completely independent and he hated studios, and he's like, I'd rather go into bankruptcy than work for, Paramount or whatever, Warner Brothers or whatever. And Love Streams is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen, and it also co-stars his wife Jenna Rollins. So I just couldn't recommend his films more.
Yeah. Speaking of Cassavetes, and also speaking of a couple things that have come up, cigarette smoking and sleaziness.
Oh yeah.
Let's get to the opening scene of this movie, which is John Cassavetes just marinating in a pool of his own sweat and chain smoking. I love one of the first visuals you get in this movie is John Cassavetes smoking a cigarette that is just bent to shit. Like it's like the end of the cigarette with like the lit end is just pointing in a totally different direction than the butt. It's just like off askew, and he's trying to smoke this thing and he like stamps it out and then eventually like lights another one. It's just, it gets you in the vibe of this movie immediately. Just seeing him like soaked through with sweat, super anxious, super paranoid, and like his hands are shaking and he's like looking out all the windows. And immediately I was like, first of all, I love this vibe because it is so, it's like such like a rancid vibe where you're just like, oh, this guy is not in a good place. And also, this is the coolest any guy has ever looked, and John Cassavetes is hot as fuck in this movie.
Oh yeah,
I'm just getting that out of the way right now.
This is a great cigarette movie. First of all,
Oh yeah.
Okay, Yeah, if anyone out there still thinks that smoking cigarettes doesn't look cool and like smoking,
Yeah.
oh, so gross. That's not cool at all. I don't understand how anyone could ever want to do that. Watch
pull
this
up-
movie and then I defy you to still hold that opinion.
Yeah, pull up Cassavetes and Falk smoking in the B&O Tavern.
Oh yeah.
God.
And I was watching that and I was like, I don't smoke. I've smoked before, but it's never been something that's been habitual for me. And I was like, damn, I want a fucking cigarette.
Yeah, I feel like watching that scene will make at least any heterosexual man, but maybe just literally anybody want a cigarette. Yeah.
I also don't know. I know that Elaine May shot this in Philadelphia. But I thought while watching it was New York, and I'm not sure if within the film itself it's supposed to be New York. But it feels like shitty 70s New York, which is one of my favorite movie settings of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was
Mikey.
Philly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But maybe shitty 70s Philly is just even worse. We're just going farther down the ladder of sleaze, right? It's a lower rung even than 70s New York is 70s Philly. Anyway.
Yeah. So Mikey's played by Peter Falk. Nicky's played by John Cassavettes. And Nicky is like holed up in his apartment because he's read in the paper that a gangster was killed. And he stole some money.
It's not an apartment, by the way. It's a hotel room at the Royal Hotel, the Royale Hotel, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. He stole some money, so he's worried that someone's going to, he thinks that there's a hit out on him, so he's worried someone's going to kill him, and he calls Mikey because he's in trouble, and
doesn't
Peter
tell
Falk
him
shows
an
up.
address. He tells him cross streets, right?
Yeah.
He's like, this street and this street, right? Yeah.
I think I love that he specifically is like, yeah, you need to call a cab, stop 3 blocks away, and then walk over, because he tells him I'm at a phone booth. And then for Nicky to signal to him without being like, hey, Mikey, he throws the wine bottles out the window to get his attention.
Yeah, to get his attention. Yep. And then he throws the towel, which
Yep.
is monogrammed with the hotel's name, so that Mikey knows, oh, that's the building he's in, right? It's like so elaborate and so paranoid.
That's the whole
for
movie.
a lot of this movie, yeah, and for a lot of this movie, I don't know about you guys, but this was my first time watching it. So Kevin, if you can project yourself back to your first viewing of this movie, were you guys wondering how much his paranoia was a reflection of reality versus like just kind of his own I was wondering as I was watching it how much of this threat is real and how much of it is in his head, and it ends up being basically very real, right? Like the threat is not in his head at all. This paranoia is justified, but for a lot of the movie I was actually wondering myself, like, how much are these people really after him? I don't know about you guys.
I completely understand that. I do think I just took the story for granted. Like, all right, yeah, there's somebody after him, but it does play like Mikey is going to check up on his manic, paranoid friend who might do something rash if he just doesn't check up on him. And but I also think I'll come back to this later, but like, knowing how paranoid he is and then knowing what happens is also one of the greatest parts of this film, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I wasn't sure because the movie just kind of drops you into the situation without much context. I wasn't sure how much of his paranoia was induced by like drugs or alcohol, because he is behaving very strangely and is for a good portion of this movie. And that's kind of where the crime movie hook, that's where the movie hooks you with the crime movie element, where it's like, okay, this is a thriller about a guy who thinks there's a hit out on him and his friend's coming to check up on him. So there's this immediate mystery of like, okay, is his friend involved? Is his friend the one who's going to try to kill him? And then as that kind of fades away, you realize how it's not really important, and the mere it's more of an exploration of the paranoia that he's feeling.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's founded or unfounded is, again, kind of secondary or tertiary to really the character stuff that's going on here.
Yeah.
And for a good portion of the movie, I wasn't even sure if Mikey was going to his house to kill him or not, or going to the hotel to kill him or not, and carry him around and around the city. And because there's a shot later where we're introduced to the crime boss and he's on the phone with someone, but we don't see the other person. And then it cuts back to Mikey hanging up the phone, and it's like, okay, am I supposed to take that? Is that supposed to be a clue or anything like that? Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm sorry. We'll keep going.
You're good. No, but I think you're right. I think that like the movie eventually makes it clear that whether you're in my headspace where I'm like, how much of this paranoia reflects reality, or whether you're in the headspace of like, okay, I'm taking this movie at face value, I think either way, you eventually arrive at the correct conclusion, which is the one that you articulated, David, which is that the movie starts telling you, hey, it's not actually about what is happening, right? It's about how it is affecting these guys. That is what we want to focus on. Like, that's the point here, right? And we actually, so like we get some of the best stuff, in my opinion, in the whole movie around that in this first scene, right? Because Mikey shows up, he's at the hotel room door, and I love it's some of the best Peter Falk yelling at the top of his lungs that I have ever seen in this movie is in this first act. I love him standing outside the hotel room door and going, "Open the door!" and like slamming into it. And eventually
I also love him singing before he gets angry. Open the door and let me in.
Oh yeah,
I don't remember the rest of the song, so let me in.
Yes. It's just immediately right off the bat you get a sense of these guys' relationship, right? Which the relationship sort of takes the shape of like Nicky is kind of the irresponsible fuck up. He also reads as like the younger brother to me. Right?
Oh yeah.
And Mikey is the one who's like kind of got his shit together more. He feels very like older brother. At times he feels like paternal. Like at times he feels fatherly to Nicky, right? And he comes in and like is trying to calm Nicky down. I love him massaging his neck. Peter Falk is just like rubbing John Cassavettes like neck in the back of his head, trying to like relax him, and that is just like such like a sweet, tender, intimate gesture that immediately again just gives you so much context about these guys, about their history. Kevin,
that scene blew me away. Like it's pretty short. Like I only think it's like maybe 20 seconds, but Cassavetes breaks down. And he starts crying into Mikey's shoulder. It's almost like when you're a kid and you're like, oh, mom's here, dad's here. I can like let go of this fear. But it's also like it's a platonic. It's barely platonic at this point. Like it's almost a romantic. Like, oh, thank you, Mikey. You're here. Like I feel comfortable and safe now. And then like
it's definitely a level of male intimacy that you don't see a lot represented in movies. And when you do see it, it's usually in crime movies. It's usually about in mob and gangster movies, right? Yeah.
And then you talked about how he almost is like the older brother or the dad, because he comes in and he's like, no, I know how you get when you call the phone. I know you're having an ulcer attack and you need medicine because your ulcer will perforate or whatever. And then he's like, he takes the Gelucel or whatever because he's like, take it. And he's like, what is it? And he's like, it's poison. Like, no, it's Gelucel. Like, and then he eats one. And then he does the like, let the train go into the tunnel or the airplane go into the airplane.
And then he runs to a coffee shop to get half and half because that's going to help ease his ulcer. This is so fucking funny.
This is maybe as much as there are more impactful, more like deep moments of this movie. This is just maybe on like a lizard brain level, just my favorite thing that happens in this movie. is Peter Falk going to this coffee shop, and just a classic Elaine May comedy character, this coffee shop owner guy who is just immediately extremely difficult, right? Where he's like, oh, you want half and half? We don't have half and half. We have milk and we have cream, right? And he's like, the cream's in the little bottles. And Peter Falk's like, well, give me the little bottles. And he's like, we don't sell the little bottles to go. And like they go back and forth a bunch of times. And eventually Peter Falk is like, okay, like fill up a cup of cream and charge me for 15 coffees. And the guy's like, okay. And he turns around and Peter Falk jumps over the counter and and goes, you listen to me, you give me that cup of cream or I'll kill you, you understand? 'Cause I'm crazy!
Because I'm crazy.
It's Peter Falk freaking out in this movie is one of my favorite things in the entire in the entire film. It's great. It's a grade A freak out.
Yeah, it's incredible. This movie's quite funny, I would say.
Yes, it's very underrated in how funny it is to contrast the seriousness. Like, there's a few moments where I like burst out laughing because you're so tense, and then it is truly a comedic relief of like, okay, it's like even they're not taking it seriously.
Yeah. Yep. So he does eventually get the cream though, and he goes back to Nicky, and is like, nursing him through his ulcer attack. And they're sort of talking about the situation, which we come to learn is basically Nicky is aware. Someone has told him that there is a hit out on him. There's a contract out to have him killed. It's kind of all just vague mob stuff. We never really get details. But it's pretty much, you're led to understand Nicky has made out with some money that he shouldn't have, right? And people are after him as a result. And there was another guy who was maybe involved in this who has turned up dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Nicky's basically
paper,
like... Yeah. And so Nicky's basically like, they got him, I'm next, right? And that's where all the paranoia is coming from.
And Mikey's let's get you out of town. Let's get you to the airport. And Nicky again is very, very paranoid, very unsure what to do. And they go running down the stairs, and so Nicky decides that they should switch clothes. So he's going to put on Nicky's going to give Mikey his jacket because he thinks someone might be outside watching them. And there's a line that made me laugh because I'm a child, where Mikey goes, "You think I'm fingering you?" Because
I also laughed at it. Laughed at that
because I'm 12.
And here they also notably, Nicky asks to wear Mikey's watch, right? And Mickey's Mikey. I just combined their names and made Mickey.
Yep.
But Mikey is basically like why? Like, you're already wearing my coat, right? And he's like, oh, for luck, right? So he lets him wear the watch, and then in exchange, right? Mikey is like, well, then give me your gun, right? And it's a big moment of trust between these two guys, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because we kind of get the feeling that Nicky is suspicious of Mikey. He called Mikey to come, right? But he's also sort of suspicious of him, like, okay, like, is he gonna kill me, right? Is he also here to kill me? But he does hand over the gun, which I think is like a big moment between the characters there. Yeah.
In that moment where because it's like a pretty short revolver, so he's kind of holding it like lazily with like a couple of fingers, and he's like, yeah, take the gun.
Yeah.
And he doesn't let go, and they're both just tugging at it, and he's like, yeah, take the gun, and he won't let go of it, because like you said, even though they are like technically best friends, he still doesn't trust him. Like, he doesn't trust anybody right now. Yeah. And it's a brilliant little moment.
It is also like him like holding it out for him to take, but then refusing to like actually let go of it is such like a childish thing.
Yes.
And I think you see tons of that in Nicky's character
100%.
throughout this entire movie.
Yeah.
He's so immature.
Like,
yeah.
his behavior, I feel like, gets increasingly childish, right? As the movie progresses to some extent, right? And I think part of it is because I'm gonna try not to do a whole audio thesis paper on this idea. I'm gonna try and mention it super quickly, which is, I think the thing with Nicky's character is he, number one, knows he's gonna die, right? He pretty much has accepted there is no way that I am getting out of this, right? And I think he fully understands that from the first moment we see him, right? And everything that he does in the movie isn't trying to avoid that conclusion. It's basically like flailing and railing against it, right? Because he's sort of already accepted it as a foregone conclusion. I also think there is part of him, and this is text at one point in the movie. Mikey says, when he's trying to deal with the ulcer attack, right? He says, "You want to die. You don't want to get better," to Nicky, right? And I'm like, I think that is very intentional line in the script that is telling us something about the character through another character's eyes, right? And I'm like, no, I think it's true about Nicky. I think there is some part of him that does not want to be saved. I think there is some part of him that wants to just give up so that this will just be over. And I think a lot of his childish behavior in the movie is kind of underlining those two points, where he knows what's coming and he knows he's powerless to stop it. And there's a part of him that is basically just like, fuck it. This is what the universe has in store for me. So I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want until the Reaper comes and gets me.
Yeah, I read Nicky as almost like a character who has been told he has, a week to live by the doctor.
Right.
And this night is him checking off his bucket list, for lack of a better word, but doing everything that he wants to before death comes to him, which he knows is coming soon. And it's I don't think it's an accident that the movie ends in the morning, in daylight, where like the night is up, everything, time is run out for him. And every impulsive move that he makes, every, prank or joke or jab that he does against Mikey, is really like him just like going to the grave, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, just kind of flailing against the inevitability of his own death.
Right. Which in some way, I think Elaine May is transcending kind of her critique of masculinity here, and also just saying something about the human condition in general, because to some extent, is that not what all of us are doing all the time, right? Because even though we don't only have one night to live, we do know eventually we're going to die someday, which is, again, is at points text in this movie. The conversation that they have in the graveyard, right, where Nicky keeps trying to get Mikey to say that, right, to be like, will you say that you will die someday? And Mikey's like, I don't want to talk about this shit, right? I feel like Elaine May is saying something there too, basically being like, to some extent, we're all Nicky, where we're all trying to distract ourselves and immerse ourselves in various forms of escapism, right? To ignore the fact that there's an expiration date that we're all like moving towards. And I think the way that it's handled in this movie is very subtle and very elegant, because that is a theme that is used in tons of art, right? Lots and lots of art is concerned with that idea. This is one of the more subtle and effective examples of it that I've seen.
He knows he's got, like, the clock is running. He's got a few hours left in his life, and then we'll get to the rest of his, like, borderline gluttonous things he wants to do. Like, he wants to get a beer, he wants to have sex, he wants to see a movie, and he also wants to say goodbye to his mother and his son and his mom. I mean, not his mom, his wife. It's just all this, like, like you said, he's checking off, like, his last day, but all while kind of fighting that, like you said, fighting the inevitable of, like, I'm going to die, but I'm going to scrap for a few more hours to live, kind of thing. But the bar is, I think, maybe the best scene in the movie.
It's such a good scene. And also, I do just want to highlight Man, 1976. What a year where it was normal and not at all like strange or gross for two grown men to sit at a bar drinking beer, milk. There is a shot glass on the table, so they're taking shots of some kind of hard liquor and then just also chain smoke cigarettes. And at some point they get food, and I think Nicky's eating like French fries or onion rings. It's some fried thing.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, man, 1976 was crazy because everybody was just like on legal prescription amphetamines, right? That were keeping them rail thin despite the fact that their diets consisted of beer, milk, and fried shit and just tons of cigarettes.
Their arteries are like a sewer system.
I would spend the next 36 hours straight in the bathroom after the night that Mikey and Nicky have. I would just be like, okay, that was not worth it. All of my guts are being flushed. But yeah, this bar scene is great. There's so much here where you're sort of without the camera being really showy or obvious about it, you're sort of alternating between their perspectives. You're sort of seeing Nicky the way Mikey is seeing him and vice versa in this bar scene. And in a way that I think is just executed so subtly and so great.
There's a specific
incredible
moment
stuff.
in this that I will never forget because it did take me probably I think it was my second watch that I noticed that I think we talked about this earlier where it's Ned Beatty who's the hitman and he's in his hotel and he's like writing down BO bar or BA bar and he's like the address, and then once he hangs up, it cuts to Mikey hanging up at the bar, kind of showing that hey, Mikey is setting him up. And then it's like he says to Mikey, I'm gonna call back and then I'm gonna let the phone ring 3 times. And then when that happens, you exit the bar and I'm going to come in to kill Nicky. And so that ever since then, Mikey's on edge. And Nicky's also just on edge in general. And then there's like a moment where they're just kind of shooting the shit, talking about their kids or whatever. And then Mikey just darts his head and he's like, was that the phone? And then Cassavetes or Nicky is like, no, are you expecting a call? And then Mikey kind of he notices that he's catching on to him, and he's like, haha, wouldn't that be funny? Some guy using a bar as an office. In that moment of Cassavetes is like, he's got his cigarette up, and he's at a full smile because he knows his buddy's joking. But then it just slowly turns into the biggest frown. Like, it's a beautiful moment of Cassavetes acting, of like showing this complex like dread that he's feeling. That that's when he realizes like, oh, Mikey, it might be trying to kill me. It's not just paranoia. And then I think he bolts right out the bar, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, he takes off running.
Yeah.
That's when he wants to leave. And I do like the moment of Peter Falk when he's like trying to leave the bar. He's like suddenly like, hey, let's go somewhere. Like, let's go see a movie or whatever. And I like Falk being like, hold on a second, I haven't finished my beer. And just taking a huge chug of this beer while like making direct eye contact with Nicky. It's a very good beer chug from Peter Falk. And as he was doing it, I was like, huge power move.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also him trying to delay further, right?
Yeah.
He's like, if I can just keep him here for long enough, which he does, which is also an important thing in this movie, is it's sort of fate that the night just doesn't end here.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because Mikey points it out later, but he keeps Nicky there for as long as he was supposed to. Ned Beatty, the hitman, is just late. He gets stuck in traffic, right? And that's what leads them on this whole like quest through the city that is the rest of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys were talking about Cassavetes earlier. I, as well, I thought he was incredible in this. I thought he was great. And Justice and I, our previous episode, we were talking about Reanimator, and I was mentioning how Jeffrey Combs was just like, is so locked into that character for the duration of the movie. I felt the same way about Cassavetes, where there's never a moment where I am looking at John Cassavetes in this movie. I am always looking at Nicky. He is always just completely, he kind of disappears into the role, I felt like. And I thought he was great. Falk's great as well. And I guess we'll talk about Falk a little bit more as the movie goes on. But with all of the paranoia and the intense emotion that Cassavetes has to convey, even in this opening, I thought he was incredible.
Yeah, that's a big part of Cassavetes' like mindset when it comes to acting, is that especially in the movies he directed, he would tell the actors like, you we want to make the barrier between the actor and the character as little as possible. Like, so whatever you need to do to make it more personal, like you can cut it, bend it however you want to do. And like in his movie Opening Night, where Jenna Rollins is his wife, like the character is like a woman who is an actress that's aging, that is not at the top of her game anymore, but still this is all she has in life. And it's this existential dread of like, how long can I keep my dream going? So it's like, I do think that's very intentional of like, maybe this is part of Cassavetes' personality, that he is always paranoid. He's always like anxious and like jittery and like borderline manic. Because if like listening to interviews of him just as a person, he's not far off from Nicky. Like he is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, but I don't know. I don't know a ton about his personal life or stuff he's done outside of this and what I've seen him in Rosemary's Baby.
Not to nerd out about deep acting school stuff too much, but Sanford Meisner, the legendary acting teacher, does appear briefly in this movie. He's just part of the ensemble cast. Yes. And Sanford Meisner was friends with Elaine May, which is how he ended up in this movie. And also like him and Cassavetes and all those folks. Falk was one of his students as well. Like all operated in kind of the same circles. And I think that really speaks to his performance here. I think a lot of the stuff that you guys were just saying about his performance is kind of wrapped up in that, where it's like, yeah, this is a guy who like knew Meisner, right? And I feel like a lot of the stuff that he's playing feels so real. Good shit. It's good. It's a good performance. Anyway, so they leave the bar here, right? And this is sort of, we kind of go through a few different set pieces. Where initially, I think the first thing here is that Cassavetes brings up the movie more or less right away, right? Where he's like, I want to go see a movie. They don't end up actually doing that, but that's like kind of the first mission, right?
Yeah, he talks about this movie theater that like shows double features all night and the candy counters open all night. Take me there. Take me there.
Dream.
And instead of doing that, they end up, the first place they go is to like a bar. And it is in like a black neighborhood. And so all of the bar patrons are black except for Mikey and Nicky, right? Yeah. And disco music is playing, and this place just seems like it has such immaculate vibes. It is such a, first of all, great production design, great looking bar. Would love to hang out here. And also, just like every single extra that they have in this scene, like they all look like they're having such an awesome time. And the music that's playing, like the vibes are great. And man, Nicky comes up and just fucks the whole thing up, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, he ruins it.
Converts the vibes immediately.
Falk has to call his wife, and at one point when he mentions to Cassavetes that he has to call his wife, Cassavetes says, "We were in that bar for 45 minutes, and you didn't have to call her then," which sets up a little bit more of that suspicion. There's a great line that I just want to call out from Peter Falk in response, where he says, "I got a terrific suggestion for you, Nick. I suggest you find somebody you can trust." And so while Mikey is on the phone with his wife, Nicky's at the bar hitting on someone's wife and then decides to be a horrible racist. What a cool guy.
Yeah.
What a pal.
I love the guy I didn't take down the actor's name, but I love the guy who plays the husband that he has offended here, right? Where he's like, buying this lady a drink, and this guy comes up and he's like, "Hey, that's my old lady. Like, back off." I just love this guy's performance, especially when Nicky starts. You're right. It is racist and bad. It's also coming from a place. Cassavetes plays this in a very interesting way because the things that he says, none of it is, he's not like saying slurs or anything, right? The guy is basically, the guy says a couple things and Nicky basically responds with questions, right? Yes. Where at one point he's like, "Why are you black?" Yes. Right? And the guy, I love the supporting performance because the guy looks at him like, "What the fuck is your problem?" Like his eyes get super wide and he's like, "Seriously?" And I just Cassavetes is sort of playing this in an interesting way where it doesn't feel motivated by racism. It feels like he just wants to cause problems with everybody who he encounters, right? He's basically like, I just want to, it's again like a kid having a temper tantrum. He's like, I just want to break shit, He's trying
sort of he's trying to get any sort of like real genuine human interaction out of someone, even if it's negative. I think.
Yeah. But yeah, very powerful scene, and I like a lot of the supporting performances like in here as well. Yeah.
And I think it's great because then they immediately say like, "Oh yeah, you're the man," right? Because they immediately assume they're cops because they're coming in here and they're antagonizing people, specifically black men, to be like, "Hey, I'm hitting on your wife. What are you gonna do about it?" So they automatically they start like, I think a few of like two or three other dudes like pull Nicky away because they see there's about to be a fight and their friend's gonna get arrested because they think he's a cop. Which is, they did that. They would just piss people off, push them to where they would assault a police officer and then arrest them. So it's like they see what's going on. They're like, "Oh, you feel big and tough? Well, let's go buy you a drink and then you can leave." So nobody gets arrested. And then Mikey, I think he ends the phone call eventually. He's like, "Oh no, what has Nicky gotten himself into?" Like,
and he basically pulls him out of there. And like, I love the moment that you're talking about, Kevin, where they're all just like, it's full of like tension and hostility, but they are being really like nice and polite with what they're saying to Mikey and Nicky, where it's like, "Hey guys, like let's just buy you a drink. Like what if we all just buy you a drink?" Right? And it's like it feels motivated from a very like tense place where it's just like, okay, if it will keep you from fucking arresting everybody in this club and like shutting us down, sure, drinks are on us, right? Just get the fuck out of here. Like, how can we get you the fuck out of here? And it's a great ending to the scene. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I also like this next scene here where they get on the bus and Nicky decides to smoke a cigarette and tells an old lady to go fuck herself. Which fun.
By the way, this old lady, like, she's in the right. Smoking's not allowed on the bus. She is also sort of being a pain in the ass because he lights up and she's immediately like, "Hey, don't you know the rules?" and I was like, "All right, bus police." Excuse me.
I think that might be like prime Nicky shithead moment because one, he knows because he's like, "Can I get a cigarette?" And Mikey's like, "You're not supposed to smoke on here." And he's like, "Is he gonna stop me? Is he gonna stop me?" And it's like, "Fine, just do it." Like, and then like you said, the lady's like, "Yeah, you can't smoke in here," and he's like, "Shut up," or like, "Go fuck yourself," or something. And then just being an asshole. And then eventually, I believe that's when he's like abruptly decides to visit the graveyard because they drive by it.
Yes, and it's because they're on their way. Where are they on their way to? Is it?
I think the movies. Because the bus
right.
stops and Mikey's like, "This isn't the movie. This isn't the movie."
Yeah. And I think it's motivated, and I think Cassavetes plays this really well without actually saying it. I think it's motivated by him still being like, I can't really trust Mikey, right? And he's like, Mikey agreed to go to the movie. And so he's like, because he thinks that's where we're going, we shouldn't go there, because if he's setting me up, Like, that's where it's going to be, which ends up being totally true. Like, Ned Beatty is on his way to the movie theater,
Yep.
right? And yeah, so he makes the bus stop, or the bus stops anyway, I think. And
Well,
he's like, we're getting off here.
I
Yeah.
think it was but he fights the bus driver because
Yeah.
the bus driver's like, I'm not gonna stop right here because you're being an asshole and you're smoking.
Oh, yeah.
And
then
then
he's telling him that he has to get off the back of the bus and that he's
Yeah.
not going
Yes.
to get out
and
through
then
the passenger door. Yeah.
By the way, the bus driver was played by Emmett Walsh, who passed away a few days
Yes.
ago. And he was in Blade Runner and like Midnight Cowboy and Raising Arizona. So it's kind of amazing that Elaine just gets these amazing characters that are in there for a few minutes. And then
You barely even see his face. Like,
yeah.
mostly you see the back of his head.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it was him until I watched it a few days ago. And then
Yeah, there's tons of great bit parts in here that are just people trying to do their normal jobs in the middle of the night and have zero chill. They are fully fucking fed up with any form of bullshit.
Yeah.
It's so funny, by the way, because when they start fighting Emmett Walsh because he won't let him off the bus through the front door, and I love that John Cassavettes has him in a headlock and is like sort of choking him, right, and like I think even punching him a little bit, and Emmett Walsh is basically like, it doesn't sound like his vocal cords are being constricted at all. His voice is coming through loud and clear, and he's just like, "Yeah, let me go and I'll fight you."
Yeah. I love that.
It rocks so hard.
And then there's a weird moment, which is this is such a man who grew up in the 50s type of thing, where Cassavetes has him in the headlock, and then he's like, how about this? You let the people on the bus, and I'll stop fighting you, and you let us off. And then they both say, I trust this man. He's got the honor of my word, or something like that. Where it's just like this cordial, almost like like they're knights dueling. Like, these are the rules and we're gonna follow them despite us hating each other. And then he immediately breaks it by sneaking out. As
soon as the door opens to let the passengers on, they both just run off the bus.
And then they're like giggling like schoolboys when they're running down the sidewalk, like knowing what they got away with.
And hop the wall of the cemetery to go see Nicky's mom, who's buried in the cemetery. And this scene is the one that I was talking about earlier, where I think some of the bigger, headier themes of the movie come into the text, right? This is where Nicky really gets fixated on the idea that he is going to die, and starts talking to Mikey about the inevitability of death in general. And he wants Mikey to engage with him on this. He really wants to like have a conversation about it. And Mikey is basically like, I don't want to fucking talk about this. Like, you know, and Mikey's attitude is sort of, what's the point? Like, yeah, I'm going to die someday. So is everybody. Like, who gives a shit? Like, what's the point in talking about it? Is sort of his attitude. Whereas Nicky is basically like, because it's more real to him, because he's like staring down the barrel of that gun imminently. He's like, I want to connect with somebody about this feeling, you know? And it's this scene, at least for me, I don't know about you guys, is one of the scenes where I got a little bit more empathy for Nicky. Like, I kind of feel for him a little bit more in this graveyard scene, where like, yeah, he's been a shithead throughout the last bit of this movie, and he will continue to be a shithead after this graveyard scene. But it's important that you care about him at least a little bit, I think, in this movie. And this graveyard scene is one of the points where I really feel that, especially when they find his mom's grave, and he kind of can't stop laughing, but it's not because he's not taking the moment seriously. It's because it is so serious, right? And he is so he's like so panicked and so scared, right? And he's just kind of laughing at the absurdity of it all, right?
Yeah,
he's basically
the
like,
reaction of someone who just like doesn't know how to process what's going on.
Right.
So all he can do is laugh at it.
And I really felt for him here.
Yeah. I like they're talking a little bit about death and their families. And there's a great moment where Nicky says to Mikey, I wish your mom and dad were alive, and I wish my mom and dad were alive. And then he tells Mikey that he knew his brother Izzy, who died when Izzy was very young, and when Mikey was young as well. And Mikey didn't know that he knew Izzy or something like that. And I found that really interesting of like, it's a moment where he discovers that they're really closer than they thought, and everyone has a different side to themselves that you don't get to see. And it kind of profoundly affects Mikey, and it really affects him for the rest of the movie, and particularly towards the end when he tells his wife the story of his brother dying.
Yeah, isn't that also the moment we might be talking about the same thing where it's Nicky brings up, it's like, this is why we are such good friends, because we knew each other before all these tragedies happened. We remember what it was like when life was like pure and wholesome, and like we hold on to that, hoping we can get back to that someday. And I think you're right, it does move Mikey more, because then immediately after this, it's like they go back into Nicky's like laughing because he's like stunned, and Mikey's trying to say the Haddish or the Kaddish, which I think is the Hebrew like prayer, and then Mikey starts to walk away, and Nicky yells, like, if Mom, if anything happens to me, Mikey did it, and Mikey replies in anger, "You take that back."
Yeah.
And I think that's a moment of guilty conscience from Mikey, because he's like,
oh yeah,
no, like it is because of Mikey. Like, even though he would probably get killed anyways, like if Mikey never even showed up, but he's ultimately advancing the inevitable of him getting killed.
And I think it's so important that line from Falk, where he's like, he yells at him to take it back. I think it's so important that it comes after Nicky has asked him if he believes if there's anything after death, right? If he believes in God or any kind of afterlife. And Mikey says no, right? He doesn't, right? And so it's important because then Nicky is saying, Ma, if anything happens to me, Mikey did it. And he's not reacting to the idea that God or the spirit of Nicky's mom or any of that stuff might be hearing him, right? He's not concerned with any kind of like spiritual consequences here. He doesn't want Nicky to think that he has anything to do with his death. That's what he's mad about. Is like, how dare you think that I'm doing that thing that I'm doing, right? Because I want you to view me in a certain way and not in the way that you are viewing me, which reflects reality, right? Which I think is like so interesting about that moment.
Well, and I also think there's a lot more going on with Mikey in this scene in regards to that theme, because when they're walking throughout the cemetery to find the grave and when they're leaving, he's constantly saying, "Excuse me," because he's stepping on graves in the dark.
Nicky
and there is also Mikey is, I think. Is it Mikey?
I thought it was Nicky that was doing that.
I think it's Nicky, because what happens is, no, it's Mikey that says, "Excuse me," and Nicky's like, "What do you like?" It shows the difference in the respect of the dead, because Nicky's like, "Who are you talking to?" And Mikey's like, obviously the dead person's grave. He doesn't say that literally, but he feels rude because he's stepping on graves, and Nicky's like, "Nobody's there."
And he does have a line where it's like there's a difference between believing in something and having respect for it, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, even though I don't believe any of this stuff, I still respect it and treat it with reverence. Yeah.
And I think that's where reciting the Kaddish comes from as well, where he feels obligated to pay some sort of reverence, even if he doesn't believe there's an afterlife. And I found that really interesting. We should just talk about Falk in general here, because I think he's great in this, obviously. I feel like Cassavettes is giving a very showy is the wrong word, but he's putting a lot into the role that you see very clearly on screen. By contrast, I think Falk is holding a lot of emotion in, and everything's just kind of bubbling under the surface, and occasionally it bursts out, and he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he has to appear calm and cool and collected to help his friend through this situation. And I think it's an incredible performance, honestly, along with
Yeah.
Cassavetes, of course. But Falk is doing something a lot more subtle and nuanced, and I really appreciated that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I do think there is. We could get into this near the end, but it almost like it is very subtle, but it almost feels like Falk is just as miserable as Cassavetes is. He's just not showing
Mhm.
it. Like he
Yeah.
does realize he is going to get his friend killed, and despite him hating Nicky, he still doesn't want him to die. Like it's this
Mhm.
weird like give and take of even at the very, very end where Nicky's pounding on the door, he says, "Run, schmuck," like because he knows he's gonna die, but he's like, "Just go!" Like he doesn't want it to happen, despite him actively doing it.
Mhm.
See, I
It's
don't think he
beautiful.
hates him though. I don't think he hates him, and I don't even think. I think he's struggling throughout this movie about whether or not he's going to go through with it. And
Hmm.
Falk doesn't do anything textually to convey that. The script
Yes.
doesn't really textually do anything to convey that. But I think there are wheels turning in his head throughout this movie, where Mikey is deciding if he's going to go through with killing Nicky.
Yeah.
And there's a very key moment that comes up later in this movie that I think is the deciding factor. Um,
Hmm.
and we'll get there when we get there. Justice, what did you think of Peter Falk?
Yeah, I'm with both of you guys. I think his performance is amazing. I think Falk is a great actor, and I think I agree broadly that his performance is maybe a little bit more restrained than Cassavetes, but I think that that is necessary for the character, which I feel like you
Mm-hmm.
guys sort of tangentially touched on. Right? It's like, yeah, this guy has to be played more restrained, because that's who this guy is. He is basically, as one of you pointed out, I think it was Kevin. He really is feeling the same intensity of the emotion, as Nicky is. He's just better at hiding it. He's just better at bottling it up. Right. And yeah, I think he's amazing in this movie. And I think literally anytime he does let the lid off, and it freaks out in this movie, which happens a few times, just real primo stuff. I love Peter Falk shouting. It's so good. But yeah, no, he's amazing in the movie, and like every time I've seen him, Peter Falk is amazing. He's just like he was one of the greats, right? And he's awesome in this movie. There's a couple specific moments of his performance that we haven't gotten to yet that I think will be worth kind of zoning in on. But yeah, overall,
There's
he really works for me here.
there's one other thing about this movie that I wanted to talk about because of this scene, and then we'll move on. And I want to talk about the way this movie is shot and edited, and from a cinematography perspective. Um, this movie is shot at night, and you can tell it looks
Hmm.
very clearly shot at like a low budget, with not a lot of lights around. Everything's very dark, and the editing tends to cut back and forth between scenes and moments and the characters kind of frenetically at times, and there's
Hmm.
also times where it just sort of sits and rests on them for a while. And I found that initially disorienting, but as the movie goes on and the night gets deeper and darker, the city kind of disappears and it
Hmm.
becomes a void, and it's just the two of them in that void, and the rest of the world fades away. And thematically, I felt like that really contributed to this being a character study where, these are two guys who are lost in the world, and the only partner that they have in this moment is each other. And some of the cutting back and forth and stuff conveys, I think, that the paranoia and the intensity of their situation, but also the intensity of their relationship and their emotions.
Yeah.
What did you guys think? How did you guys respond to the way this movie's shot?
I think.
Oh,
Oh, sorry,
go ahead.
not to cut you off, but
No, you're good.
I love the way, like, similar to why I love Cassavetes films, is that it's a very it it feels immersive, but like mainly because I think the almost the entire movie's like handheld. Like I don't think it's on
Mm.
rails, or maybe there's a few static shots that I'm just missing. But like it's
Yeah.
a very physical movie that matches that they're always moving because they don't want to stay in one spot to get to for Nicky to get killed. So they like even when they're like tussling in the streets, the camera's always kind of circling them. Or you can tell that like if you look at the corners, it's like rocky a little bit. It's almost like as if you're hanging out with them and you're just like a few feet away, and it feels like you're with them trying to get away, and you're like, and it's also like you said, it is like pretty low budget, but they also, I remember listening to somebody talk about it. I think there was like 1,000,000 feet worth of film shot for this film, and just, I mean, you know how films are made, almost all of it's gone. Like you just don't use all of it. And
Mm.
it's crazy to think of how much film they were burning through, and how like they couldn't take time to light everything perfectly. But it adds to this
Mhm.
like grimy, like almost scary setting because you know something
Mhm.
bad's gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like how this movie is shot. I think the thing that you were talking about, David, where it is sort of by turns frenzied, and then sometimes like really like static and kind of like stoic and just zoned in on like one specific thing, one person's face, one specific angle, right? That really really worked for me because it sort of feels like the camera is, again, without being super obvious about it, is showing you the perspective of these two characters, right? It feels like the frenzied, like really physical handheld camera stuff that Kevin was talking about. It feels like that's Nicky, right?
Mm.
And then it feels like the long takes where it's just holding on one angle of one specific location, and we're just sort of watching things unfold a little bit slower. It feels like that's Mikey, right? And so to me, it totally worked because it felt of a piece with the story and with the characters, right? The only other thing that I have to say about the physical making of this movie, the camera work and the editing, other than that, which I think is all fantastic, is at one point I did notice a boom mic in this movie. I don't know
Yes.
if you guys
Yep.
caught that. Yeah.
Normally not good at catching that stuff, but we do get a
Yeah.
full boom mic
Yeah.
in the shot at the kind of the next big scene here, which is Nellie's apartment.
Nellie's house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that boom mic coming in, and I was like, "Oh, hey, didn't expect to see you here, Mr. Boom Mic."
Thanks for dropping by.
Yeah. It doesn't detract from my viewing experience at all. It was just a funny thing to notice while I was watching it, where I was like, "Huh, wonder if this aspect ratio is what it was presented in theatrically, because that shouldn't be there."
That's a good point. I never thought of
Yeah.
that.
Anyway, but yeah, so basically that is the next big thing after the graveyard, right? Is yeah, like David said, Nellie's apartment, right? Because Cassavetes has basically been like, hey, I got a girl, there's this girl that we can go to for a good time, and that's one of the things he's been floating in addition to the movie, and so eventually they decide to go see this girl that Nicky's got. Yeah.
There is one thing that happens before that I wanted to mention. It is, I'm pretty sure it's Ned Beatty, the hitman. He's on the payphone outside the movie theater, and it's
Oh yeah.
honestly it's a beautifully shot scene where you see
Mm-hmm.
the neon of
The bar
the
sign
marquee of
or the marquee? Yeah,
of the
the
marquee of
movie
the
theater sign.
theater,
Yeah.
and he's like, yeah, they're just not here yet. I've been at the movie theater for an hour, and
Yeah.
then the boss is like, "Well, just go in there, like, and see him." And then the boss is like, "They're not gonna shoot you up in a movie theater," like, which is hilarious. And then the
We'll
guy,
talk about Resnick. I kind of love Resnick.
I know, I do too. And the guy that was sitting across Resnick is like kind of hilarious because he says like a really short line that's incredible, and he's like, they're all paranoid, these guys, like, which is just
Yeah.
all of them. And funny enough, that guy, William Hickey, plays the grandpa in Christmas Vacation, which is like a family favorite of mine. So
Yeah,
it's so
yeah.
funny to be like, oh, that's the grandpa that lights his stogie and lights the Christmas tree on fire, and he's just like in the background of
Which
the mob boss.
Which, by the way, that character from Christmas Vacation, our last episode was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man
Oh
2002.
hell yeah!
The Podmaster did say after we finished recording that David's and my Willem Dafoe impressions sounded like Uncle Louie from Christmas Vacation, that guy that's in Fine Place.
That's awesome.
But and then Resnick, I was talking about Sanford Meisner being in this movie. That's Sanford Meisner. Resnick is played by Sanford Meisner, the legendary acting coach and the namesake of the Meisner techniques. So yeah, and I think he's great in this movie too, which we'll talk about Resnick more probably. But yeah, no, I love that scene with Beatty too. And I love him going into the movie theater and just like sitting down and watching the movie.
Yeah, nothing happens.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a scene on the bus before they get to Nellie's house where they play the slap game where you hold out your hands and the other person tries to slap them. I was getting PTSD flashbacks to grade school. Watching
It also
scene.
seems like they're both. It also seems like in that scene where they're doing the slap game thing on the bus, it seems like they're both so fucked up at this point.
Oh,
like
yeah.
they're both just like totally blitzed, which I think is important that they show us that before we get to Nellie's apartment, just because of how things go down there. It's important to note that these guys are entering this situation just fucking lit off their asses with how much they've been drinking.
And
They
there,
also
there
seem
is
like they're maybe a little more comfortable with each other. Too,
Yes.
Yeah.
After opening up. So
Yeah.
and there's one pretty important thing I think on that bus where they're doing the hand slapping game. It's like Mikey's like, yeah, we need to get you to an airport, and then
Yeah.
he says like, well, are you coming with me? And he's like, yep, I'm coming with you. Like it's this, like Mikey does want him to live, and he does want to help him, but he is like truly stuck between like we both I think they both work for Resnick, but like
Yeah.
so he's like it's either my boss or my friend, my boss or my friend, and he keeps going back and forth. And there he's like back on Nicky's side, being like, we got to get you to an airport so that like we can have you get out of town or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So then we go to Nellie's apartment, and boy, talk about the vibes being bad. I mentioned that this movie opens with sort of rancid vibes. This is where the vibes go almost into, if the whole movie was like this would be on my list of evil films, because this is evil film vibes in this scene. It is very, very upsetting and uncomfortable.
It's hard to watch. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. So Nellie here, who is played just insanely well by Carol Grace, like a real powerhouse of a supporting performance, where she has to do a lot of being really tense and really bottled in, and not being big or explosive at any point. Because even Peter Falk as Mikey, he gets his moments to erupt. She sort of doesn't. She has to kind of play this as really tightly controlled. And man, she is just doing the shit out of this. Anytime we get a close-up on her face, I'm like, oh, first of all, oh, holy shit, a woman is really directing this movie, right? Because in another crime movie centered around a relationship between two men, we would not get this kind of interiority from a female supporting character, I think, right? This feels like Elaine May's camera is very specifically singling Nellie out in moments to be like, no, you, the audience, will understand how she feels about this, right?
Exactly.
I will make sure that you do, you know?
Yeah, I think this is what you're saying is like that is the difference between a man directing it and a woman directing it. It's like Elaine May has had that happen to her, but
Yeah.
Mikey and Nicky have not, and a lot of men don't realize the like the predatory nature of that. Like, what? I'm not doing anything. As you just like are coming on to the girl, and she's like, I think she literally says like, "What are you doing to me? Don't embarrass me like this." And she just kind of like gives in to it, but never wanted to.
And I think
I think she
she
says, I think she says like, no, stop a few
Yeah,
times too.
she does to both of them.
Yeah,
to both
of
of
them.
them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we see so much of how she is reacting non-verbally, because what she says a lot of the time is like stuff like Kevin just said, like, don't embarrass me, like, please. But what her face is saying is, I am scared for my life, right? I am afraid that if I do not react in a way that makes these guys happy, they will kill me, right? Is what her face is saying, right? And it's like, it makes you understand her behavior so well, right? Because it's like, even though she's saying no, stop, she does eventually just like start kissing Nicky back and like being like, yeah, tell me you love me, right? And it's like, I don't think it's because she's in love with this dude. I think it's because she is terrified of him, you know? And the same thing with when Nicky kind of is like egging Mikey on and being like, yeah, go like try with her, right? She starts pleading with him human to human, being like, please don't do this, right? Like, I understand the situation. I understand that he is putting you up to this, is kind of what she's not saying, right? But it's like, you don't have to do this. And then like he, in an attempt to sort of reconcile his relationship with Nicky, right, is like, well, maybe, if I do what Nicky wants, right? So he like starts going through with it. And again, I think she's just so scared, right, of both of them, where she's like, I don't want to die tonight, yeah.
And her fear is like immediately justified, because
totally, yeah.
Mikey starts like, despite being like, no, Mikey, I don't want to. She doesn't say. I think she just says like, no, like, please stop. And then Mikey, just completely blowing past the no sign, tries to pull in for a kiss, and she bites his lip.
Yes.
And Mikey like slaps her, I think twice. And then Nicky rushes over because he hears her crying and Mikey hitting her. And immediately he's like, you bit his lip? Like, not even like the fact that like Peter was blowing by her consent sign. And it's like, you could tell immediately her fear was justified. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like, as soon as she does try and take a little bit of power back, it's like she's immediately slapped down by both of these guys, right? Even the guy who was just saying, oh, I love you so much, right? It's like, then he's like, how dare you treat my friend like that, right? Because it's like, she matters so much less to him than Mikey does. Yeah.
And Elaine May, I think, does a great job shooting this scene, where a good portion of it is just focusing on one character and just lets the scene play out without a ton of editing. There's a great moment where Nicky and Nellie are just having sex on the couch, and Peter Falk is just
and then
sort
on the
of awkwardly...
floor. They're like on the couch, and then they're just on the floor. Yeah.
And Peter Falk just has to awkwardly sort of sit in the kitchen, and he's trying to figure out what to do while they're doing it.
Yeah.
The movie makes you just sit in this gross, vile, uncomfortable feeling. However, I did laugh at this moment. I didn't realize that Peter Falk had a glass eye.
Yeah.
And there's a point where he's just sitting in the kitchen listening to them fuck, just like, what am I supposed to do? And he goes a little cross-eyed.
Yeah.
I did find that very funny.
That was actually, so it sort of is an amusing visual, and I think that's kind of on purpose, because I think it is a little bit Elaine May just allowing you to experience the absurdity of this situation too, and just be like, yeah, it's highly upsetting and uncomfortable, and it's also kind of funny because what the fuck is even going on anymore?
Yeah, it's just
right?
like, well, I guess this is happening right now.
And that's actually one of the other moments of Peter Falk's performance that I said earlier that I was wanting to call out when we got to them, is that long take on him in the kitchen where he's just sitting there like listening to fucking noises, right? And smoking, just chain smoking cigarettes, right? And I love the look on his face of like, it is sort of that moment of just like, how did I even get in this situation? What the fuck has my life come to, right? And how do I, like, what do I do next, right? Is sort of all in his face at the same time. And he looks simultaneously like kind of resigned and hopeless, but also kind of just like, what the fuck? Like, this is so absurd. I love that long take on him. I think it's masterful. And also just like, again, we're veering into evil film territory where I'm like, if this was more of the movie, this would be going on my letterbox list because this is some of the worst shit I've ever seen in a good way, in a way that I like and appreciate, you know.
This whole situation leads to a fight between Mikey and Nicky outside of Nellie's apartment.
Because Mikey is mad that Nicky set this whole situation up, where he basically eggs Mikey on to like go try and make it with Nellie, and the lip bite and the slapping and everything happens. Mikey is basically like, you did that on purpose to embarrass me, right? Like, you are making a fool of me, is basically how the fight starts. Yeah,
it is strange that he, like, I do truly think Nicky just wanted to have sex one more time, and his friend was along the way, because that's where it was like, I don't know exactly why, but he's like, I think Mikey's like, you bring me along for you to have sex with, I think he says like a hooker or something, and then Nicky's like, she's not a hooker, or like, he's like, I'm not paying for that or something. So then Mikey like hammers down. It's like, yes, so you knew, he's like, I think he says that's one of your girls. So like, you knew she wasn't gonna want to like make out with me or sleep with me, so he just like, but at the same time, it's like he didn't have to. Like, he tried to force it, which maybe was him, like you said earlier, trying to like find some common ground with Nicky, because they're not, I don't know, they're kind of struggling.
Yeah. I think what a lot of their interaction with Nellie is about that leads into this fight is both of them care so fucking much what the other one thinks and feels about them, right? Mikey needs Nicky's love and approval so bad, and Nicky needs Mikey's love and approval so bad. And poor Nellie is like a tool that they are using to try and get that, right? Like, she's just caught in the middle of basically these two dudes being incapable of just telling each other that they love and appreciate each other, you know? Like, and I think the whole thing with Mikey trying to make it with Nellie, right? Is like, that's what Nicky has said that he wants. Nicky's like, hey, now it's your turn. Like, go after it. That would make me really happy, right? And so Mikey's like, okay, this is what Nicky wants. This is how I get Nicky to be happy. This is how I get Nicky's approval and appreciation, right? So that's what is up with him even going for it at all, I think. And then also, I think Nicky encouraging Mikey to do that is basically like, Nicky's like, well, you know, this is my last night on Earth. I wanted to get laid, but I'm going to make sure my friend gets laid too. Like, I want him to be having a good time, right? Is, I think, legitimately where some of it is coming from. And it's like the disconnect of like, because the point of both of the things that they were trying to do in that scene is to just try to get the other one to feel their love and appreciation, right? But they're so trapped in this prison of their inability to communicate with each other honestly, right? That it gets totally misinterpreted and just causes this fight. And the fight is really about, I love you so much, and I can't fucking tell you that I love you, and it makes me so mad. And I have nowhere for that to direct that anger except at you. You know,
this fight culminates in Mikey asking Nicky for his watch back, and Nicky breaks the watch.
Yeah, he tosses the watch on the road and it smashes. Which, again, not gonna go into full film school thesis paper about this, but there is something highly symbolic about a timepiece being smashed in this movie where Nicky is fighting against the clock to stay alive. You know, it's one of those moments where I was like, I saw what you did there, Elaine May, and I really appreciated it.
Well, and I think it's the moment where Mikey decides that Nicky has to die. Mm-hmm. Maybe not has to die, but he's been fighting with this whole time throughout this movie, and it's a moment where he realizes that, oh, Nicky doesn't even have respect for this very precious personal item. You know, the watch has a lot of importance to him, and in a way, the watch is Mikey, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, Nicky just treats it with such disregard that he's just gonna throw it and smash it just because he can, just because it amuses him, just because it's funny. And that's how he treats Mikey.
Yeah. Which Mikey tells him in no uncertain terms here in a second, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nicky does try to apologize, and as Mikey's walking away, and then it just makes Nicky even angrier, and he says, like, the boss doesn't respect you, no one respects you, and it leads to them wrestling and fighting in the street. And this is, I think, one of the moments where everything is so dark and it's so late at night that no one else is out on the streets, and it is just these two guys alone in the darkness, fighting and tussling with each other to find some kind of meaning and find some kind of emotional satisfaction from each other. And I think it's a really great moment. It's also very funny. There's a moment where Cassavetes slips and falls in a puddle.
Yes. Which doesn't look like it was planned. It looks like it's him slapping, I think. Falk. He like slaps him, and then like just the force of the slap causes him to lose his balance, and he just slips and falls in a puddle. I also really like, there's a great line, both line and line delivery, that Falk has here to Cassavetes, where he calls him a piece of nothing. Right? He says like, I don't remember the line that precedes it, but he says, "You're a piece of nothing." And it first of all, sick burn, just a crazy thing to call someone. And also I think it's just like, it's the worst thing that Nicky could hear in that moment, because he's been sort of fighting against this idea that his life is about to come to nothing. Right? And to hear Mikey say that, where it's basically like, you have no worth. Right? Is just kind of the thing where he's just like, okay, like, fully fuck you, and causes them to go their separate ways. Yeah.
I think there were two really important lines, like, before I think they actually start fighting, and it was this one where Mikey is like, almost, he's got like a big grin on his face, and he's like, "You call me the Echo. You tell everyone I have to say everything twice because I have a tunnel in my head." And then Nicky's like, no, that was for you. That joke was for you, not Resnick, who I was eating dinner with.
Right.
And then
I said it loud enough so that I knew you would hear it.
Yeah.
Which by the way, we'll get to the other one, but just quick interjection here. David, if you ever used that same insult on me, it would probably ruin my life, because I know I say everything twice. and as I was watching this scene, I was like, oh God, oh shit. If
It's
David
okay,
ever really wants to hurt my feelings.
I let you know in the editing every week.
Yeah, you already said this, the editing comment. So.
I did fully lose my chill during editing Spider-Man, because that episode was originally unedited 3.5 hours, which is fucking insane. And there were a couple moments where we were going through the editing, and I just left a comment like, "Yeah, bro, you already said that. Yeah, bro, you said this. Like, yeah, you literally just said that in the last sentence."
So please don't start calling me the Echo, because it'll ruin my life. I just heard that burn, and I was like, oh man, that would hit me really hard too. I understand where Mikey's coming from. Anyway,
that comes back in the final scene, which I'd love to touch on again. But
yeah,
there is also, I think, the biggest line in the movie for me is that Mikey tells to Nicky, like, right before the, like, because after this line, it's like Nicky says hurtful things, and then Mikey because he owes him $200, and he throws the money at him, and he says, "You're a piece of nothing," and then they start wrestling. So I think it's that sequence. And then he says, "I'd do anything for you, anything, and unless you're sick or in trouble, you don't even know I'm alive," which is apparently, I mean, just going off of one night, I completely believe that.
And again, like, it gives you so much context to what you've already seen from these guys, to hear Mikey say all this out loud, right? Because it's like, so much of the acting between the two of them was already giving you so much of the history of these guys and their relationship. And then when you get this context from Mikey, it sort of reframes everything that you've already seen, right? Like Mikey coming over with the ulcer medication, right? And forcing him to take it. It's like, especially if this is a thing where if what Mikey's saying is true, and he has hasn't actually seen Nicky in a long time, because Nicky's been getting closer and closer to like Resnick and has been like, spending time with all of these guys who are more important and higher up, and he's sort of been neglecting his friendship with Mikey. It means even more that Mikey comes over with that ulcer medication, right? And the fact that Nicky's like, hey, like what is that? Like, how did you know that I would be having an ulcer, right? And he's like, hey, if you call me and you're freaked out, like I bring the ulcer medication. It's what I know to do, right? And so it's like it reinforces so much of what Mikey's saying, the stuff that's already happened, because you're like, oh yeah, I've been seeing that. I wasn't applying the lens to it that I now am, after hearing Falk do this great like blow up where he's basically like, yeah, unless you're sick or in trouble, like you don't even know I exist.
After that, he kind of storms off and they separate, I think, for the rest of the movie, and then he goes and finds the hitman that's at the movie theater.
Yes, they notably, I was noticing this. They notably do not come face to face ever again for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Even when they talk to each other at later points in this movie, they are never face to face again after this fight, which I think is a great choice. But yeah, so Mikey goes and finds Ned Beatty, the hitman, right, and starts driving around with him looking for Nicky. And Nicky goes home to his wife, right? There is a great scene between the two of them. Really, really great supporting acting from Joyce Van Patten here as his wife Jan, right? And they have like a whole scene where she initially is like, I'm not gonna let you in, like basically fuck off,
I'm not
right?
interested.
And which
he says like they're gonna kill me, and she's like, I'm not interested.
Yes, which that is one of the coldest lines in this entire movie.
It's awesome.
It rocks so hard. It's such a good response. And by this point in the movie, you have seen so much of Nicky being just a total shitheel that I think it's so interesting and fun that in this moment when he shows up at Jan's at home, right, and Jan is there with the baby, you are scared for her, you're scared for the baby, and you are fully on her side, and you're like, get the fuck out of here, Nicky. Like you're fully with her on this, which I think is such a strong and interesting choice for you to make, considering Nicky is like your protagonist, right? It's basically like you want her to succeed in keeping him out of the apartment.
One of the first things he does when he gets in is he hits her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And then that casts a shadow over the rest of this scene when he goes in to say hello to the baby, and at the end when he's trying to like force her to kiss him or show some sort of intimacy. Again, this is another big scene with just like rancid, horrible, evil, shitty vibes.
Yeah. And I think when she eventually does sort of break and is kissing him and is like a little bit more tender with him, I think it's a combination. It reads as a combination. I feel like Joyce Van Patten was maybe playing it this way, where it feels like a combination of she wants to give him what he wants from her so that he will leave, right? Where basically she's like, okay, maybe if I try the strategy of I stroke your hair and tell you that you're a good boy and that I love you very much and don't want you to die, maybe you'll get the fuck out of here and leave me and my baby alone. I feel like is part of it. And I feel like there is also part of it where she is telling the truth to some extent that she doesn't want him to die and does care about him still, right? And I think it's a strong choice to do both of those things, right?
Yeah.
To basically, like, she has arrived at the point where she's basically like, this guy is bad news. I have to keep him out of my life. If he shows up, I have to not let him in the door, right? And yet, this is a guy who I still have some feelings for, you know? And one of the reasons she can't let him in the door is because he's dangerous and because they'll slap her around and stuff. And another reason that she can't let him in the door is because he'll talk his way back into her heart in some way, right? And so he's dangerous on multiple levels for her because she does still love him.
Yeah, he's in full manipulator mode. There's one, he literally hits her in the face and then is like, I don't know exactly what he says after that, but almost like threatens her. And then he's like, I want to see the baby. But you can't manipulate the baby. because he was like forcing. He's like, hold my thumb, and the baby starts wailing and crying, and he's like, he won't
Yeah.
even hold my thumb. It's like I think that's a huge like. I don't know how intentional the baby actor was, but like it was like perfect that he made his kid cry because one, the kid obviously doesn't recognize him or is
Mhm.
like scared at his touch, and then he goes back
Mm.
and then he tries to like swoon his like the mother of his child, which I also kind of agree that it is like good, like fascinating that she kept in the like, yes, she's terrified that Nicky's gonna hurt her physically, but she still unfortunately has feelings for him. Like
Yeah.
it is like kind of realistic that there is kind of both.
And Nicky's really playing up like the fact that he's going to die, right?
Yes,
He's
yes,
there's the line where she says like, "What do you need?" And he says, "I need a shot in the head,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm going to get that anyway." And he's asking her if she's going to kiss him goodbye. And he's really laying it on thick and kind of trying to get her sympathy and trying to win his way back into her heart, like you said, Justice.
And because, like I said at the top of this episode, John Cassavetes is unbelievably hot in this movie, you
yes,
understand why it works on her, right? There is part of me that while I was watching this scene, I was like, I know he just slapped her in the face, and yet I understand how she could fall for this because he comes in looking sweaty, manic, unbraced, gorgeous John Cassavetes, and I'm like, there is something about this bad boy, right, where I'm like, I get it. He comes, storming back into her life and knocking shit over and breaking things, and he's beautiful, right? And so there is part of you while you're watching it that's like, yeah, like he's sort of irresistible, in a way that makes it all that much more manipulative and horrible, right? Because he's weaponizing it. He knows that she can't resist him, right? Or at least that she'll have trouble, right? And that's why he wants to come through the door so bad, is because he's like, once I'm in there, I'm in there, you know? And eventually I do like that he leaves of his own volition.
yeah,
I do think that's another moment where I do appreciate Nicky a little bit, even though he is such a scumbag, right? Where he basically does hit a point where he gets the what he wanted from her, which is an outpouring of affection of some kind, right? He wanted someone to tell him that they cared about him, right? And he gets that. And then he kind of his attitude when he's leaving is basically like, I've sort of fucked up her life enough, and I am going to choose to let her be, which would be more endearing if he then didn't go and take out more of his existential angst on poor Nellie again.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Because he cares about her less, right? Which is one of the things. It's like, yeah, like he treats Jan horribly, but he will still save the worst of his ire for a woman he respects even less, which is, yeah.
And I think he just forces his way into her apartment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And slaps her a couple of times and leaves. I don't remember a ton from this scene,
It's
so
really
if you guys
short.
have anything to add
Yeah.
from that. Yeah.
One of the main things that is one of the big moments in this scene for me is in the last scene with Nellie. He is mad at her at the end of that scene for sleeping with a couple of guys who he names, right?
Yeah.
He's basically like, oh, you fooled around with this guy and that guy. And she starts yelling at him that she never slept with one of them, right? And so there's like this thing in the last scene where Mikey was there. So when he comes back, she says in this scene that the only reason she did anything with either of those guys that he named is because Nicky told her to, right? Nicky set up her and these dudes who in the last scene he was yelling at her for sleeping around with, which that's the big moment in this scene for me, where it's like, oh, even the things that he's mad at her about are directly his fault, like a direct result of his own actions, which is just like, yeah. So that was the big moment for me here.
Yeah, it really is revealing how kind of evil he is, like deep down, like or
Hmm.
how he doesn't like how like sociopathic he is. He's like he doesn't care what happens as long as he gets what he wants and his pals get what they want, kind of thing. Like it's and using uh her as literally just like an object, not a person. It's
Yeah.
even though like that is we all kind of knew that deep inside from the first time he went to see her, and then he just like confirms it all.
Yeah, and I think it illustrates the thing that I was saying before, where it's like he really uses her, and sort of by extension we can like extrapolate that like he uses women as a tool to gain the approval the approval and respect of other men,
Mm,
right? Like that is how
yeah.
Nicky views women. It's basically like women are a resource that you can use to gain respect and approval from men, and other men matter more to him than any woman, right? Which I think is again just a thing that Elaine May has tapped into so effectively here when it comes to like traditional ideas of masculinity, right? About women being tools that you can use to strengthen your friendships with other men. They're status symbols that you can use to assert your dominance over other men, right? And like they're not people to him, and I think the moment of her saying the only reason I like fooled around with those guys is because you told me to. I think Cassavetes is playing in this scene a little bit, that he either forgot that or sort of hadn't thought about it, right?
Yeah.
Where he was like, "Oh shit, like I'm mad at you, but you're right. Like I do remember that." Is kind of how he plays it to me, right? Where it's like he sort of has forgotten his own sort of influence over this situation, and he's like ascribing evils to her that like are his own, because he doesn't see her as like a person. He sees her as like an object.
And it's only like 2 minutes, I think, that scene or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I want to mention, I think before and after that scene where he returns to her apartment, where it's Peter Falk and Ned Beatty riding around trying to find Nicky.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
the dynamic between Ned Beatty kind of just bitching about like, ugh, I should have chosen another job. Like by the time I pay for parking and gas and food, like I'm gonna have nothing. And then Mikey's just like so sick of him. And there's two lines by Mikey that I think are maybe the funniest things in the movie, where it's uh Ned Beatty's like, "Is that him?" And then he's like, Nicky, I mean, Mikey's like, no, that's not him. And he's like, are you sure? And it's like, why don't we just kill him to find out? Like, just pointing out that Ned Beatty's character is kind of an idiot and, like, he just wants to get this over with. And then my
Yeah.
favorite line of, like, the funniest line, I should say, of the whole movie for me is when there's, like, Ned Beatty's like, is that him? And then maybe 3 seconds after, he's like, well, is that him? Like, not giving Falk any time to register. And he's like, wait a minute, you dumb bastard. Like, and Falk has his, like, the glass eye straight and his other eye peeking at Beatty. So it just, like, plays up this, like, are you a fucking moron? Like, give me a few seconds. It's dark out. We're in a car. Like, you're such an
Yeah.
asshole.
Yeah. Nicky might be having a bad night because he knows he's gonna die. Mikey might be having a bad night because he's having to confront the reality of his friendship
Yep.
with Nicky. But Ned Beatty's having the worst fucking night out of anyone in this movie. He's just trying to get a job done, and
I mean,
and the world is against him.
Yep.
it's not that bad of a night though. What? He got to go see a movie. He's
got a beer.
He's been eating some takeout. Yeah, got
Yeah.
beer. I think he just likes to complain.
Yes.
We should talk about Resnick too, really quick. I don't think it's
Yeah.
like right here, but Ned Beatty and Peter Falk go back to like Resnick's Resnick's headquarters or wherever he is, and
Yeah.
they're telling stories of what their night's been like, and registering formal complaints, and Resnick seems like he does not want to be a mob boss. He is just so disinterested with being a mob boss. He's just like, I'm fucking tired. I want to go to bed.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up. Do your jobs.
Yeah. I don't remember what his line is, but he does have one moment that is very much like a classic mob boss, like, you want I should hire somebody else for this job? Would you like that? Is that really what you want? Where it's like the subtext, the thing he's not saying is like, do you want me to fucking kill you right now and put somebody else on this? Right? And they're like, no, like, we'll get it done, right? It's like one of those moments, which I really, really enjoyed. And Sanford Meisner plays it immaculately.
I kind of forgot that he does, like, kind of threaten to...
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
it's like a very
like
subtle
you said,
threat.
subtle, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To, like, kill him if he doesn't get the job done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
There's
while that's happening, I'm sorry, but Cassavetes goes to the candy store with no ice cream, and he's pissed.
Oh, yeah. Man, I love this guy working at this candy store.
I do not trust a man who runs an all-night candy store.
I love this guy, though.
That man is a predator. That man has people chained up in his basement beneath the candy store.
I love this. I love the guy playing him, though. Like, I just love this performance in this character so much. Because Cassavetes comes in and he's like asking for shit. He's like, do you have ice cream? And he's like, do you see ice cream? We only have what you see. And he's like, oh, do you have this? Do you have that? And he's like, do you fucking see it on my counter? Then we don't have it. It's so good. I love this guy so much. I love how over it he is. He's like, it's fucking 5 a.m. I run an all-night candy store. I only have to make it through 2 more hours, and then I can go down and torture these children that I have tied up in my basement. But I do not need this shit right now. Anyway. Yeah.
In retrospect, that scene did not need to be in the movie at all.
No.
Like, I'm glad it is.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's in there, because it does show Nicky's, like, contempt for anybody that, like, kind of doesn't get what he wants. Like, oh, he went in there for ice cream, and then he settles on, like, some other candy and, like, lollipops and, like, a comic book. But you can tell he's still angry, because he's like, it's his last night on Earth. He wanted ice cream.
Right.
And he just hassles this old man, and despite it having nothing to do with, like, the story.
I mean, it's a great scene, and it's funny, and I like it a lot, but it does kind of feel like it needs to be there.
Okay.
Because it feels like his last meal. Or
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
It's his last moment. You know, he knows that I think morning coming is I think he knows that when he's not going to be dead by the time the sun comes up, right? And of course that turns out to be true. It is kind of like his last moment to be a child.
Yeah, which the comic book.
It's like his last pleasure in life. He gets a little bit of satisfaction from his wife. He doesn't get the satisfaction that he wants out of Nellie other than torturing her and bullying her. So what's the last thing that's going to make him happy is, I don't know, a candy in a comic book. I found that kind of beautiful and poetic in a way. It is also just a very funny scene that I enjoyed a lot too.
Yeah. I also do like, I like everything that you're saying, and a lot of that I hadn't even thought about. Like, where he's kind of reverting, kind of his last act is basically like, I'm just going to revert to being a boy, right? It's like, I just need to embrace innocence, right? Because maybe I'll find comfort in that, because he hasn't found comfort in anything else, right? And he still doesn't, but it's sort of his last resort. I also like, just to call it out real quick, I like when he walks into the candy store, you do see a shot where you can see behind the counter, and the guy running the candy store does take a gun out immediately as soon as Nicky comes in the store, where he's basically like, I might have to kill this guy, which I thought was great.
Either because he's going to rob me, or he's aware of the fact that I have kids in the basement.
Or he knows about my John Wayne Gacy basement. Yeah. And so then it's pretty much the end of the movie, right? Like, yeah.
Now we're back at Mikey's house, right?
Yeah. So Mikey is at home after this night from hell, just talking to his wife here. And I like this scene between the two of them. I like that his wife seems very like supportive of him, and it seems like their relationship is actually okay, right? But it also seems like she doesn't really know how to talk to him about what he's going through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where she's basically like, she wants to help and she wants to be there, but he's coming to her with stuff that she's like, I don't really know how to handle this. I enjoy that dynamic in this scene. And like a big part of it hinges on him telling the story about his brother Izzy who died, which his wife apparently didn't even know about, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, Justice, I think because this movie is about, men's inability to like communicate genuine emotion and their search for it in vain from other people. It is a pretty powerful moment here where, for whatever reason, in Peter Falk's relationship with his wife, he hasn't been able to confide in her about this huge important thing that changed his life, and yet, Nicky knows about it, and Nicky could give less of a shit about him, but they still have that thing that connects them together. Mm-hmm. And Mickey doesn't know how to have that kind of relationship with a woman, even though that is even his wife, right?
Right.
And Mickey is just as lost as Nicky is.
You're doing the Mickey
Mikey.
thing that I did
Oh
earlier.
God.
Mikey.
I knew it was gonna fuck us up at some point.
It's very
Yeah.
easy to do,
it is,
accidentally
yeah.
make Mikey Mickey. But it would be harder to make Nicky Nike, because that
Nike.
would not roll off the tongue as naturally.
Elaine maybe should have picked different names. Maybe if this was
Yeah.
like George and Balthazar, that'd be maybe not as catchy of a title.
I don't think. Yeah.
Getting into-
No.
into
But I
persona.
agree with everything that you're saying, David. I think all of that's like totally spot on. What I was feeling in the scene as well. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you agree with me.
I also think this is a big scene to show how well. I think it does go off of what David said is like it does show how insecure Mikey is, because he brings up and he's like, "Do you ever hear me repeat myself when I talk?" And his wife goes, "What?" So he has to repeat himself. And he's
When
like,
I talk,
"Do
do
you
I
hear
repeat
me? Do when I talk, do I repeat myself?" And she's like, "Oh, I don't notice." But I think that line is beautiful. Like, that's perfect, because he's already insecure to ask it, and then it just hits him right back in the face. Like, what? Like he's forced to repeat. And then
Yeah.
the whole part about, I didn't really notice the details of his little brother's story until this last time I viewed it. It was like in a moment of insecurity, telling him about how his dad let his sick brother wear the watch, and he was like, "Well, it was just because he was sick that he gave it to him." It's like, I mean, I'm the oldest. When Izzy died, he took it back and gave it to me. So he has this like, "Oh, I'm the favorite." Like, don't get
Yes.
it mixed up. Like, Izzy just was sick. Like, and it's like, dude, it's your 10-year-old brother that's dying, and you're like, that's what stuck with him, was that like he lost the family heirloom for a second.
To me, this is such a, it's that moment with Falk is such a powerful statement of the main theme of this movie, which is basically that masculinity isolates men destructively, right? Because
Yes.
when he is doing that thing that you were just talking about, Kevin, where he's like, he only gave it to my brother because he was sick, and it was always meant for me. Like I was the favorite. It's saying it without saying it, right? That the toxic pursuit of traditional masculinity is something that is passed from father to son, right? It's generational, right? And he inherited this thing from his dad. And he's lying to himself. He wasn't his dad's favorite, right? Izzy was. And that's why he got the fucking watch, right? but he can't accept that because the pursuit of these traditional masculine ideas, it's like I have to be the perfect man like my dad was, and he's the one that I have to look at as the ideal, example of a man, right? And so I need to be the man that my father was, and I need to wear his watch, and I need to hold his values and walk in his footsteps, right? And the fact that might fundamentally at the core of who Mikey actually is not be true of him, that maybe he isn't the man his father was, the fact that scares him so much that he can't even tell himself the truth about it, I think is exactly what Elaine May is saying in this entire movie, right? Because it's like the reason that masculinity isolates men, right, is because the fragility of it is such that it's like it breeds narcissism and interiority. It's like you become so fixated on how other men perceive you that you aren't thinking about anybody else,
I completely agree. And there's one thing I wanted to add that is a little out of context, but this is like my favorite genre of films, is like men facing their insecurities. Like
Yeah.
I love Midnight Cowboy, which is like, I don't know if you've seen it, but John Voight plays a hustler that's like dresses up like a cowboy, and he goes to New York to like be a sex worker. But then he realizes that like he's not as desirable as he thinks. He's not this tough guy.
Mhm.
And it has to do with this similar theme. And then also Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master kind of touches on this, where Freddie is also just like a pervert and a freak that just can't deal with his own like insecurities, and the only people he connects with is other men. So and Mikey and Nickey is up there in the like the homoerotic, barely platonic cinema. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, these boys
Yeah.
really do just need to kiss each other. Well, and
They
and
do.
Justice, what you were saying about his getting approval from his father, we forgot to mention, but in the scene with Resnick, he does ask Resnick, like, do you like me? Or something like, Nicky said you don't even like me. And I think Resnick kind
Yeah.
of brushes it off. And
Yeah.
it's this thing where like he is just Resnick, I think, has become kind of a father figure, right? And he's
I think
still
what
searching
Resnick
for approval.
does. I think what Resnick does is even so devastating, because I don't remember the exact line, but it very much has the vibe of, oh yeah, of course I like you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's where it's totally like completely unconvincing, and they show Falk's reaction to it, and he seems crushed, right? Because he's like at this moment he really needed that. He really needed like daddy to tell him that he's a good boy, and like he's not even getting that, yeah. And so then here, Nicky shows up at Mikey's house, right? And he starts pounding on the door. Again, just a thing that I noticed a lot in terms of like a cinematic device. There's a lot of closed doors in this movie. And there is a lot of people pleading at doors to be let out or to be let in, right? The movie opens with Mikey screaming, "Open the door," right? And it pretty much ends with Nicky doing the same thing at Mikey's house, saying, "Open the door, let me in," right? So I enjoy that. I enjoy the parallelism here. But he's like pleading to be let in. Ned Beatty is pulling up right outside of Mikey's house. And I love Peter Falk like wanting to let him in, but then also barricading the door with these chairs, right? Basically,
Yes.
like his heart is like, I really want to open this door and help my friend. And then his head is like, I have to make sure that by no means is he able to force his way in here. Like I have like, and it's just, he's totally at odds with himself in this moment. I just love him pushing those chairs in front of the door. It's great.
Yeah, I think part of him feels like the best way for this situation to end is for Nicky to die.
Yeah.
As much as he doesn't want it to happen, he's like, maybe this is what's best for him.
Yeah.
And he, of course, he's also thinking about himself and staying in good with Resnick and everything like that. there's a lot of, again, I think there's a lot of complexity and subtlety that Falk is bringing to this performance that you can infer both from the text and both just from how he carries himself throughout this movie. And it's a heartbreaking scene. It's really fucking sad, and I was surprised at how much it affected me.
Yeah. And this is also where we get the run you schmuck, Kevin, that you were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. Yeah.
There's two incredible lines, and that's one of them where, like, Nicky is at his peak of like, get me a doctor, and he starts coughing to be like, I'm throwing up. I'm not just here. Like he's panicking. He has nothing left, so he's pulling all the cards he can. And then there's also a moment where you see Ned Beatty like pulls the car up and he stops, so you know it's like any second now. And Mikey's like, run schmuck, and obviously he doesn't. And Nicky just keeps pounding, and there's a split second where Nicky turns around and he says, I counted 5 seconds between the just you wait and the camera stays locked on Nicky. And those 5 seconds feel like an hour where you're like,
Yeah.
when is the trigger going to get pulled? And it's unbelievable. Like, this ending crushed me when I first saw it. And then it, like, you hear Mikey, and specifically Mikey's wife, like, yell in agony because we all know what's happening. And then I believe the last frame of the movie is Mikey's face, and you hear the wheels of the car squealing, and he's like, just go to bed. And then it just, like, ends.
Yeah.
Like, it is a bleak ending.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Cassavetes gets blown the fuck away, too.
Oh, yeah. He gets
Oh,
lit
yeah.
the fuck up here, and these squibs. Oh,
Glorious.
God.
Good.
It's
Like,
yeah.
Elaine May
Long
looked at all that
barrel.
footage she shot. She's like, all right, how much do we have left for squibs? Spend the rest of the money on squibs.
yeah.
Yeah. He gets lit the fuck up. It's awesome. And I like that
yeah.
we see it. It would be very easy for them to just like show a close up of his face as he's getting shot. And I'm like, no, I like that we see this man's blood outside of his body. I feel like it's sort of important to the impact of the moment that it is violent, you know?
And this movie's rated R. There's not a ton of language. We get a few F words here and there. Of course, the sex scenes are very uncomfortable.
Although not explicit. It's pretty
yeah.
much nothing is shown, but
Yeah.
it is still quite upsetting. Yeah.
And this is really the only moment of violence in the movie, and I think it's appropriately graphic and grim.
Yep. Agreed.
There is a certain stylistic choice in filmmaking that I think is unbelievably good. And not to go on a tangent, but one of my favorite filmmakers and writers is Paul Schrader. I'm sure you all know him. And he wrote a book called The Transcendental Style of Filmmaking, where it's all about like reserving, like holding back and saving the juice for the big moment. Because if there's like 5 other gunshot scenes, the ending would not be as impactful. Like the fact that I'm pretty sure the only gunshot is at the ending. Like I don't think there is one anywhere
No, I
else.
think you're right. Yeah.
And it just like, that's why it's so moving, because you're like, you knew this was going to happen pretty much since like the fight. You knew that he was going to die. And then then when you watch this again, knowing the ending, all these little like clues of like, oh, Mikey is setting him up from the very beginning. And it makes the whole thing even more gut-wrenching when you realize that these fights are like, you know, no, you crossed the line, Nick. Like, I'm not going to help you anymore. Like, it's over. And the fact that Elaine saved the violence for the last, like, 10 seconds is a brilliant choice.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's...
But yeah, what a flick.
That's Mikey and Nickey.
That's
Yeah.
Mikey and Nickey.
What a flick indeed.
Kevin, thank you so much for bringing this movie to us. We will turn it over to you as the guest of honor. Is Mikey and Nickey from 1976, directed by Elaine May, the greatest movie ever made?
So, I will have to say yes, it is the greatest film ever, because, like you said at the beginning, when you're watching it, it is like, for me, I was like, I've never seen anything like this. And it's always like, I'm always hyperbolic when I'm watching a film that's good. I'm like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like, there's nothing that's ever going to beat it. And then you watch another good one, and then the cycle
Right.
repeats. But for me, when I first watched this, I did think, like, this is the best. Like, it stops here. This is as good as we get. Peter Falk and Cassavetes at their peak. Elaine May running the show, and it's a pretty, like, tight movie editing
Mm.
wise, and like it's yeah, I'd say it is the greatest movie of all time.
Hell yeah.
Justice.
Yeah. Yes.
Is Mikey and Nickey the greatest movie ever made?
David. So, I had never seen this movie before. Thank you, Kevin, for bringing it to us. I might have never watched this movie if you hadn't guessed it on the show, and I think that I would have been missing out big time. This movie, a thing that I like to think about a lot. It's just a theme that I enjoy, sort of mulling over, is the idea of what my own my relationship to my own masculinity, I guess, is how I would put it, right? What does it mean that I am a man and that I have kind of interrogated my own gender identity, and my own sexuality to some degree, and I have still come out of that as a cisgender heterosexual man, right? What does that mean? What does that mean I am identifying myself with, right? And I think that there are things about masculinity and about the idea of being a man, that are good or net neutral. And then there are also negatives that you have to navigate. And I think one of the reasons that I have looked seriously at my own gender identity and been like, no, yeah, masculine, that's the thing that I am, is because I relate not just to the good and neutral parts of masculinity, but also to the negatives. I feel like I've seen those things appear in my own life, and I have had to intentionally struggle against some of those impulses, but they still feel true to the core of who I am as a person. I just have to try and temper the negative impacts that they sometimes cause, right? And try to fight against the most toxic and destructive impulses of that identity, you know. I think this is a movie that really hit in a big way for me in that regard. I think it's a movie that really is asking and answering the question, what does it mean to be a man? And I think, again, it's incredible, and also not surprising that such an insightful deconstruction of that idea was helmed by a woman who is an outside observer of male behavior, right? And is coming at it from an objective standpoint where she's not just highlighting the good. And I think Nicky's struggle against the clock is also in some ways my own. And I think that what he wants is to be a better man, a man who is worth saving, a man who is worth being remembered, a man who is worthy of love. And he is unsuccessfully fighting a war against his own worst impulses. And ultimately he dies as kind of a real shitheel because he doesn't have the time to get better. And that is a terrifying idea to me. And it's one that I was thinking about for hours after this movie ended, even though I sort of watched it in the middle of the night. It sort of kept me up thinking about how Nicky's journey through this night kind of mirrors a lot of men's journey through life, and how I really hope that I can meet the end of Ned Beatty's gun whenever my time is up, as a better man than Nicky is in this movie. I think it's like sort of a cautionary tale, and I think it's told very well, and I think it's the greatest movie ever made. David, is Mikey and Nickey the greatest movie ever made?
So I didn't write down a verdict. And I didn't know how I felt after watching this movie, and figured I'd sit on it a little bit and let the conversation dictate my verdict. The greatest movie ever made is a movie that is so thoroughly entertaining or compelling that while you're watching it, it's the only thing that matters in the world. By that definition, I would not say that Mikey and Nickey is the greatest movie ever made, but that's not my verdict. Hold your fucking horses. Okay? By that definition. I had some issues with it in terms of its filmmaking, in terms of its writing and dialogue. I thought the performances were great. But while watching this movie, I was not fully locked in at every moment, at every time. But after watching Cassavetes getting blown apart with those squibs and Peter Falk sitting in his house in a state of horror and shock at what just happened, and the credits rolled, I thought about it, and I kept thinking about it, and I tried to go to bed, and I kept thinking about it, and I woke up this morning, and I kept thinking about it, and I've been thinking about, much like Justice said, so I won't repeat everything that he said. I've been thinking about my relationship to my own masculinity, but more than that, I've been thinking about my relationship to other people, and the people who I love, and the way that I want to be loved, and how this movie is really about two men lost in the dark, searching for love, and searching for acceptance and understanding, and being seen and being validated, and looking for it in all of the wrong places, but searching desperately all the same. And it conveys them as scumbags and shitheels and terrible, awful, vile people, but undeniably human, and humans with desires, with flaws, and with positive qualities that, despite everything, make you root for them and make you empathize and identify with them. I see a lot of myself in Nicky. I see a lot of myself in Mikey as well. And the way that Mikey lets the world walk all over him and lets other people walk all over him just to feel something. In a way, I think all great art, like the true great, fantastic pieces of art, explore man's inability to confront his own mortality, and acts as an exploration of the fact that we're all gonna die, and we're probably gonna fucking die alone, and that's just the way it is, and we have to live with that and figure out how to make this life worth living in the face of that. All that to say, on past guest episodes, I have been known to go against the guest's verdict. This was my first time watching this movie, as most of the other ones have been, except for that one time when we did Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight 2, and I went back on my verdict. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Mikey and Nickey, greatest movie ever made.
Wow.
It's given me a lot to think about. It's given me a lot to explore, and there's more of it to explore and think about. So I'm looking forward to coming back to it and interrogating some more of the questions that I have with it, but was really, really profoundly impacted by this one, and I really enjoyed it.
It is so funny that now our 2 3 for 3 episodes, like our two episodes where we have had a guest and all three people have said that it was the greatest movie ever made, are Mikey and Nickey, which is in the Criterion Collection, directed by the legendary Elaine May, who, you know, is a titan of cinema, stars John Cassavettes and Peter Falk, like two of the greatest actors to ever live. And then the other one is Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight Part 2.
A Polish horror movie where two zombies fuck.
Yes, a Polish horror movie that went direct to Netflix and has like, I think like a 10% Rotten Tomatoes score and like a 1.5 on Letterboxd. So welcome to the esteemed club, Mikey and Nickey. You're in good company.
We have to get to that one.
Wow. Honestly, Kevin, I would recommend that anyone and everyone watch it. I would be very interested to see what your thoughts on Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight Part 2 are, because it's a wild ride. It's very strange.
Kevin, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'd like to give you the opportunity to plug anything that you'd like to. If there's anything you want the audience to check out and support, let the people know what's going on in your life.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. This was a lot of fun. I love yapping about movies. I don't have much to promote. You can follow me on Twitter if you want. I'm at Kevin J. Hurley. I just take a lot of photos right now. That's all I'm doing. Uh, you can check out my freelance stuff that I post, but besides that, just give me a follow if you want. If not, I hope you enjoyed the episode because this was very fun.
Yeah.
Hell
Yeah,
yeah.
it's been a delight having you on, Kevin. I feel like we veered much more into actual film criticism and analysis on this episode versus what we usually do, which is a lot of jokes about pooping and coming. And I feel like your presence had a lot to do with that. So thank you for elevating the show this week.
Yeah, you really gave us some class that we are in no
Wow.
way deserving of.
You classed us up a little bit. It's true.
I'm honored.
But David, will the class be continuing next week on the show, or will we be back to normal? Tell the listeners what's in store.
Next week we're going back to Sloptown. We're doing a movie that Justice and I have never seen, which is a first, like as far as us picking a movie that we've never seen.
Yeah,
Normally
neither
the
of
guests
us have seen it at all. Yeah.
Normally the guests have done that. We're talking about not one of our favorite directors, but a director that we've kind of had our eye on, and we think maybe the rest of the world hasn't given the appreciation that he's deserving of.
We
but we're
definitely
picking
have
a
our
movie.
eye on this guy.
Yeah. We're picking a movie that he hasn't, that we haven't seen, that we really know nothing about, and that is Centurion, directed by Neil Marshall, director of The Descent, most notably, as well as Dog Soldiers, the
The Lair.
post-apocalyptic box office bomb Doomsday.
Yeah.
He also did the recent Hellboy remake that was critically panned.
He also directed some fan favorite episodes of Game of Thrones. So you might know him from that.
And this is a Roman period piece with Michael Fassbender. So we hope you guys tune in for that. And,
we'll see, because we haven't watched the movie yet. So
Yeah.
hopefully this is a movie that we can actually talk about, and we're not setting ourselves up for failure by picking a movie that neither of us have ever seen. It's going to be so funny if this movie's like impossible to talk about and we're just like, oops. But tune in next week to find out, I guess.
Yeah. In the meantime, spread the word about the show as usual. We appreciate your support. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next week. And as always,
Later,
dipshits.
dipshits. We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Greatest Movie Ever Made. Please remember to leave us a rating and a review, and to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. We appreciate you supporting the show and spreading the word. Tell your friends to listen, tell your enemies to listen, tell your mom to listen. If your neighbor has an unsecured Bluetooth speaker, connect to it and play an episode. You can follow us on social media at TGMEM_podcast. And if you've got a movie that you want us to talk about, send us an email at thegreatestmoviepodcast@gmail.com.